Welcome. You've just arrived at the edge of stillness. This is the empty boat, a quiet place where the weight of the world can gently dissolve, where stories drift like petals across a silent river. And perhaps along the way, you'll remember something your heart has always known. These are not just tales. They are mirrors, windows, lanterns for the inner night, drawn from the old wisdom of Zen and shaped by the quiet hands of the present moment. So breathe, let the noise fall away, and come with us, not to be taught, but to remember, not to escape, but to arrive. This is the empty boat, and your journey inward begins now. Story 1. The House of Ashes. On the outskirts of a mist-veiled village in northern Japan, there lay the remnants of a house long surrendered to fire. Its frame had long rotted, its walls turned to soot. Only the stone threshold remained, scorched black and overgrown with moss. Villagers called it the House of Ashes. Children dared one another to touch the stones, while the elders merely crossed themselves in silence when passing by. Riku walked past it every evening. A factory worker by day and a ghost by night, Riku moved through life like a man half remembering how to breathe. He was not unfriendly, merely unreachable, like a person who stood behind thick glass. Years ago, when he was still in school, his younger sister had died in a house fire. She had been playing piano upstairs. He had left her alone to meet his friends. He never forgave himself. Every dream since then smelled of smoke. His hands, even when clean, felt covered in ash. The doctors called it trauma. The monks said it was karma. He called it silence. One fog-drenched evening, Riku heard a sound as he neared the ruin. A quiet, rhythmic brushing, like someone sweeping a floor. He stopped. No one should be there. The ruin had no roof, no walls, only the broken skeleton of what used to be a home. Yet the sound was unmistakable, broom against stone, sweeping slow and steady. Drawn forward by something he couldn't name, Riku stepped across the scorched threshold. Inside, a woman sat hunched over the floor. Her back was bent, wrapped in a tattered shawl the color of old snow. Her hair, silver and thin, floated like spiderwebs. She was sweeping. Not debris, not dirt, just sweeping the ashes that had long since settled into the stone. Riku cleared his throat. "This house burned down. There's nothing left." The woman didn't stop. Her voice was a whisper. "It still exists in the memory of fire." He wanted to leave, but his feet refused. Something about her made time feel slow and circular, like breath in meditation. "Sit," she said, motioning to the ground. "The dead don't like to eat alone." And so he did. Night after night, Riku returned. It became a ritual. He never told anyone. He brought her tea once, but she didn't drink. She spoke rarely, and when she did, it was in riddles. She told stories of the villagers, some long gone, some still alive. She spoke of secrets buried beneath courtyards, of children born under false names, of grief so deep it changed the shape of people's shadows. But mostly, she swept. One night, Riku asked, "Why do you sweep ashes?" She paused. "To honor what remains after fire." He told her, eventually, about his sister, about how he'd left, how the guilt had rooted itself inside him like a weed with thorns. "She was playing Moonlight Sonata when the flames reached the ceiling," he said. "I was supposed to be there. I should have." The woman handed him the broom. "Then sweep." And he did. That night, for the first time in years, he remembered her laughter, the way she twirled in their cramped kitchen with socks sliding across wooden floors, how she would hum Beethoven in her sleep. The memory didn't burn, it warmed. Each sweep unearthed a new fragment, not of the fire, but of before. He returned every night, and every night she handed him the broom without a word. He swept, and something in him softened. Then, one evening, the woman wasn't there. No footprints, no broom, just wind moving the ash in spirals. Riku stood alone inside the ruin, holding nothing but silence. From that day on, he came still, not for her, but for the ritual. He swept the floor as if caring for a temple. In spring, he planted a peach tree in the center of the ruin. It bloomed faintly pink, soft as a whisper. Villagers began to stop and look. No longer did they cross themselves in fear. Children no longer dared each other to enter. It became a place of stillness, not terror. Years later, a monk visiting the village asked Riku, now older and graying, "Why do you care for this place?" He smiled, "Because it's where I stopped being afraid of fire." The Zen Parable. Long ago, a monk returned to his monastery after it had been reduced to cinders by lightning. All was lost. The other monks wept, but he kneeled in the ashes and offered incense. A passerby asked, "Why do you pray to what no longer exists?" The monk replied, "Because devotion is not for the structure, but for the space it once held. That space still breathes." Philosophical reflection. Ash is not the opposite of life. It is its reminder. In Zen, fire represents both destruction and clarity. What is burned away reveals what is essential. That which is lost teaches us impermanence, not to punish us, but to awaken us. We sweep the ashes not to undo the fire, but to acknowledge that even what is gone deserves reverence. Psychological insight. Grief often disguises itself as guilt. What we couldn't prevent becomes the story we whisper to ourselves in the dark. Modern psychology calls this survivor's guilt. We replay what we did or didn't do as if the past might alter if we suffer enough. But healing doesn't come through endless punishment. It comes through presence, through ritual, through bearing witness. Riku's act of sweeping was not about erasing the fire. It was about being with it, touching it without flinching, letting the body move where the heart was once stuck. Trauma roots in the nervous system, and only gentle repetition, like breath, like sweeping, can soften the soil around it. Meditative closing. Sit with the fire that burned you. Ask not how to undo it, but how to carry its warmth without the pain. Ask, what ashes am I still afraid to touch? What would it mean to honor them, gently, without blame? Breathing in, I see the fire. Breathing out, I bow to what it left behind. The past is not a punishment. Let the broom be a prayer. Let the silence be peace. Story 2. The Silent Bell. The old bell tower in the hills above Kiso village had not rung in 27 years. It stood like a forgotten sentinel among the pine trees, wrapped in vines and silence. The bell itself, blackened bronze, cast in the Meiji-era, hung lifeless beneath a slanted wooden frame. Its rope long since snapped, its voice retired. No one climbed to that tower anymore, except for a girl named Aiko. She arrived one afternoon near the edge of autumn. Her presence was like smoke, quiet, formless, and lingering. No one knew where she had come from, only that she walked barefoot, wore no coat despite the chill, and never spoke a word. The villagers whispered about her. She's touched by the spirits. She lost her tongue to a curse. Her voice killed someone. The monks of the nearby temple didn't ask. They simply gave her a cot in the corner of the meditation hall and let her be. Every morning, Aiko would sweep the garden stones with meticulous care. And every evening, when the sun dipped low and the shadows turned blue, she walked alone up the winding path to the bell tower. She never touched the bell. She would only sit beneath it, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon as if listening for a sound that no longer existed. Autumn passed. Winter came with sharp winds and the scent of snow. The other monks grew used to her silence, even fond of it. They said her stillness made the whole temple more peaceful. But still, no one dared follow her up the hill. Except for Ryo-san. He was a novice, newly arrived from the city. His mind, quick and sharp, had not yet learned the patience of mountain life. He found Aiko strange, and her daily visits to the bell tower stirred his curiosity to the point of agitation. One night, he waited in the trees until she passed, then followed her up the path, soft-footed as a fox. When he reached the top, he expected to find her praying, or meditating, or perhaps whispering to the wind like a madwoman. But what he found struck him still. She was weeping. No sound came from her mouth, just tears, falling steady, quiet as snowflakes. Her face remained blank, unmoving, but her eyes shimmered with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have no bottom. The bell above her trembled ever so slightly. Ryo-san stepped forward without thinking. His foot snapped a twig. She turned, only slightly, only enough to see him in the corner of her gaze, and he froze. He bowed low. "Forgive me, I didn't mean to disturb your prayer." She stared at him for a long while. Then, to his surprise, she reached inside her sleeve and pulled out a worn slip of paper. She handed it to him, bowed once, and began her descent down the hill without another glance. Ryo-san waited until she was gone, then unfolded the note. It said only, "The bell can only ring for the voiceless." He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Ryo-san sought out the eldest monk, Jikon, whose beard was white and whose eyes held storms. "Who is she?" Ryo-san asked. "Why does she climb the bell tower?" Jikon closed his eyes, remembering. "She came here as a child. Her mother had thrown her into a well. She survived, but never spoke again. We took her in. She never left." Ryo-san swallowed the cold in his throat. Why the bell? Jikon opened his eyes, gazed slow and heavy. "Because that bell rang the day her mother died. Lightning struck the tower during a storm. The sound echoed down the mountain, and her mother was found hanging in her home. Some say the bell knew. Some say the bell called her spirit back." Ryo-san said nothing, but that evening he too climbed the path. Aiko was already there. He didn't speak, just sat beside her in silence. The cold bit into his robes, but he didn't move. They sat like that until the moon rose. From that night on, they sat together every evening. Weeks passed. Winter thickened. The villagers noticed a subtle change. Aiko smiled now, just barely, in the corners of her eyes. Ryo-san's restlessness faded too. He began to listen more than he spoke. He watched the wind move the pine trees. He learned the difference between quiet and silence. Then, one evening, just as the first plum blossoms broke through the frost, Ryo-san arrived at the tower to find it empty. Aiko was gone. He waited until dawn, but she did not return. She never returned. Some said she had wandered into the forest to die. Others believed she had finally found her voice and no longer needed the bell. But Ryo-san kept climbing the hill each evening. He sat beneath the bell and listened, not for sound, but for memory. And then, one spring night, as cherry petals drifted through the air like pink snow, the bell rang. Not by wind, not by hand, just once. A deep, aching tone, low and full, like the sky itself had spoken. The villagers froze. The monks wept. Ryo-san bowed to the ground. No one ever heard the bell again. But those who heard it that night said it wasn't just a sound, it was a soul finally freed. The Zen Parable. A novice once asked his master, "Why does the temple bell stay silent?" The master replied, It is waiting for a sound greater than itself. The novice asked, "What sound could that be?" The master said, "The one that cannot be heard, only felt." Philosophical reflection. There are wounds too deep for language, suffering that lives beneath the tongue. Zen teaches us that silence is not emptiness, it is space for presence. A bell, like the heart, must sometimes remain still to hold the echo of a life. Aiko did not need words. Her grief had carved silence into her bones, and yet, through her ritual, through her return, she offered the world something louder than speech: remembrance. The bell did not toll for tragedy. It tolled for release. Psychological insight. Trauma often strips away language. Many who have endured great violence or abandonment lose their ability to narrate their own story. Modern psychology calls this dissociation. But even in silence, the body remembers. The nervous system carries pain, memory, emotion. Healing does not always mean speaking. It can mean being witnessed, being accompanied, sitting in stillness with another. Aiko's journey reminds us that ritual can be language, stillness can be testimony, and that bearing witness, truly witnessing, is one of the most powerful forms of love. Meditative closing. You do not need to speak your pain for it to be real, but you must listen to it. Sit in silence today. Ask, what part of me has gone quiet out of fear? What would it take for my heart to ring again, not with sorrow, but with freedom? Breathing in, I make space for what cannot be said. Breathing out, I listen anyway. The bell is waiting, not for a hand, but for a presence. Story 3. The Man Who Stole Rain. Long ago, in a lowland village tucked between the dry hills of central Vietnam, there came a time when the rains forgot their path. For 7 months, the sun hovered like a curse over the fields. Rice cracked in the paddies. Children's laughter turned to coughing. The rivers thinned into dirt-colored veins, and frogs burrowed deep into the earth like secrets hiding from death. The villagers tried everything: drums, prayers, incense, dances, but the sky stayed mute. Even the temple bell was silent, its tongue curled like a leaf too dry to sing. And then, one day, a man arrived. He came on foot in a black suit that never gathered dust, with a hat too wide for the wind to catch. His skin was the pale of lotus root, his eyes sharp like hawk feathers. On his back he carried nothing but a bronze bowl, smooth and empty. "I am Kaito," he told them, voice sweet as overripe fruit, "and I bring rain." They laughed. But Kaito smiled. "Let me prove it." He walked into the bone-dry temple yard, bowed to the cracked statue of Avalokiteshvara, then stood perfectly still. He placed the bronze bowl on the altar, lifted his hands, and whispered words no one understood. The sky remained unchanged. But the next morning, rain fell. Not a downpour, not even a drizzle, just enough to darken the soil, enough to stir steam from the roads and fill a single ladle from the roof's edge. The villagers stared at him with awe and fear. Kaito asked for no money, only offerings, fruits, incense, and silence. "Rain," he said, "only comes to the still." The village obeyed. For the first time in years, children stopped shouting. The fields grew quieter than graves. Even the wind tiptoed. Each day, Kaito would bow before the temple, lift the bowl, whisper, and the next morning, rain. Soft, precise, measured, as if heaven had become a ledger. But after the 7th rain, an old monk named Tom approached him. Tom had once been a scholar, but now swept temple grounds with a broom older than himself. He bowed low and asked gently, "Tell me, traveler, where does your rain come from?" Kaito smiled. "From above." Tom stared at the bronze bowl. "No, it smells of smoke." That night, Tom climbed the hills beyond the village. In a narrow ravine where old rivers had long since died, he saw it. A wide pool, deep and glistening, covered with bamboo mats. A hidden reservoir. And Kaito's footprints in the mud. He wasn't summoning rain. He was pouring it. Stealing from the last water left in the hills, stored in secret and doled out in drops. The next day, Tam gathered the village. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed his broom on the temple steps and said, "True rain is not owned, not bartered. It comes when the earth is honest." Kaito, upon hearing this, stood before the crowd. He did not deny it. He simply laughed. "You prayed for rain," he said. "I delivered it. What difference does the source make?" Then he left. But something stayed behind. Shame. The villagers returned to the temple, and for the first time in weeks they wept, not from thirst, but from guilt. They had wanted salvation so badly they'd sold their silence to a lie. The rains did not return for a long time. When they did, it was after the children began to laugh again, after the drums resumed, after the temple bell was repaired and rung each morning, without asking, without bargaining. Tam was long gone by then, but his broom remained, standing upright in the garden, where moss slowly climbed its handle. The villagers said when the bell rang just right, it sounded like a prayer too simple to be traded. The Zen Parable. A disciple asked the master, "How do I make it rain?" The master replied, "Do not seek to make it rain. Instead, till the soil, honor the sky, and be ready. When the clouds trust your silence, they will answer." Philosophical reflection. In a world obsessed with control, we often mistake manipulation for power. But Zen teaches true rain, the kind that nourishes the soul, cannot be bought, stolen, or summoned. It arrives when we are aligned, when we release our grip and become worthy of receiving. Kaito offered results, not truth. His rain fed the fields but starved the heart. Because what is given without reverence is only transaction. The drought was not just in the land, it was in the people's trust in what is pure. Psychological insight. Kaito's deception mirrors the way many seek shortcuts through their suffering. In psychology, we see this in trauma survivors who seek rapid fixes, numbing, avoidance, false solutions, instead of enduring the slow, uncertain process of healing. But stolen comfort never satisfies, just as false rain leaves the roots dry. Tam's act was not exposure, it was invitation. He invited the village to return to process, patience, presence, to remember that genuine healing comes not from outcomes, but from honesty. Meditative closing. Where in your life have you accepted false rain? Where have you traded silence for illusion? Sit in stillness today. Do not ask for answers. Ask instead, am I ready to receive what is real, even if it takes longer? Breathing in, I release control. Breathing out, I become soil. Let the true rain come on its own time. Story 4. The Willow in Her Sleep. The willow tree behind the temple had stood longer than memory. It bent low over the pond like a mother listening to her child breathe. Its leaves, fine and green, never stopped moving, even when the air was still. The villagers called it Nguet Leo, the moon willow, because on full moon nights its reflection shimmered like silver threads in the water. It was under this willow that Hana began to sleepwalk. She came to the temple after the funeral, young, delicate, with eyes that looked like they were always searching for someone just out of sight. She said little. Her husband had died, drowned in the river while trying to save their dog. They found his body caught in the reeds 2 days later, mouth open, arms stretched upward like a man trying to hold on to the sky. At first, Hana simply stayed in the nuns' quarters, helping with chores. She washed robes in silence, chopped roots for soup without looking up, swept the temple floor with careful rhythm. But then, the sleepwalking began. It started with footsteps in the night, soft, deliberate. The nuns thought it was a fox or the wind. But then they saw her, walking barefoot through the moonlight, her white nightgown glowing like mist, hair undone, face blank as snow. She always walked to the willow. There she would kneel, place her hands on the earth and whisper. Not words, just breath shaped into sound. The leaves would sway above her, as if responding. In the morning, she remembered nothing. The head nun, Sister Cho, watched her from a distance. She had seen grief before, women clawing at earth, men screaming at sky. But Hana's sorrow was different. It did not scream. It sank, quiet as falling ash. One night, Sister Chow followed her. Hana knelt beneath the willow, just as before. But this time, she began to hum, a melody so faint it barely rose above the rustling leaves. It was a lullaby, old, woven from tones only mothers remember. Sister Chow recognized it. She had sung it to her brother before he died in the war. Then Hana whispered, "Why did you go first?" Her voice cracked like old porcelain. "Why didn't you take me too?" A breeze stirred the pond. Sister Chow stepped forward, but as she did, Hana's body went rigid. Her eyes opened, wide and glassy, staring into something invisible. Then she collapsed. The next morning, Sister Chow sat with Hana over tea. She did not mention the night before. Instead, she said, "The willow is old. It listens, but it also remembers." Hana's eyes trembled. "I dreamed he was under the tree, that he was dry, warm, smiling. But he wasn't whole. He had no shadow." Sister Cho nodded. Some dreams aren't dreams. They're grief finding a door. That evening, Hana did not sleepwalk. Instead, she went to the willow fully awake. She brought incense, a piece of her husband's shirt, and a bowl of water. She placed them at the roots and sat. The moon rose slowly, pale as pearl. The leaves above sang a song without words. The pond held her reflection gently. And then she spoke, not to anyone, but aloud. "I forgive you for leaving first. I forgive myself for staying." The willow's branches dipped slightly. In the days that followed, Hana began to smile, not often, but honestly. She taught the novices how to grind herbal salves, how to thread beads for mala bracelets, how to mend torn sleeves. But every full moon she returned to the willow. She no longer knelt, she sat, and she never walked in her sleep again. The Zen Parable. A woman once asked a Zen master, "How do I speak to the dead?" The master pointed to a tree and said, "Not with your mouth, but with your being. Sit long enough in stillness, and the roots will remember your sorrow. The wind will carry it back to them." Philosophical reflection. Grief is not a wound to be stitched. It is a language, a song sung in silence. In Zen, we learn to sit with suffering, not to solve it, but to know it, to allow its voice to rise like steam from tea, unforced, unafraid. The willow did not answer Hana in words, but it listened. And sometimes, to be truly heard is the most sacred form of healing. We do not lose those we love. We return to them differently. Through breath, through ritual, through sleep. Psychological insight. Sleepwalking often arises from dissociation, when the psyche splits from unbearable emotion. For trauma survivors, the body sometimes moves toward places where the soul still aches, as if seeking integration. Hannah's nightly return to the willow was not madness, it was memory trying to reconcile, the subconscious searching for a home. Healing occurred not when she stopped walking, but when she chose to go willingly, awake, present, intentional. In trauma recovery, this shift from unconscious reenactment to conscious ritual is profound. It marks the beginning of re-embodiment, of returning to the self. Meditative closing. There is a tree within you. Its roots stretch into your past. Its leaves tremble with your pain. Sit beneath it. Ask, where do I go in my sleep that I'm too afraid to visit awake? What grief do I carry in silence, waiting for a breeze to stir it? Breathing in, I listen. Breathing out, I return. Let the willow keep watch. It remembers, even when you forget. Story 5. The Bowl That Broke Itself. In a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Kyoto, there was a small antique shop nestled between two plum trees. Its wooden sign had faded to near illegibility, and its glass windows were warped by time, reflecting the street in strange ripples. The owner, an old man named Genji, rarely spoke, but his shop breathed with stories. Inside, shelves bowed under the weight of porcelain, lacquer boxes, brass incense holders, and ceramic teapots with forgotten histories. On a Tuesday just after the Obon festival, a woman stepped inside. Her name was Mariko. She was elegantly dressed in a pale blue kimono, hair pinned in a simple twist, face calm as still water. She wandered the shop as if walking through memory, fingers brushing over objects as if they were sleeping pets. When she reached the back corner, she paused in front of a bowl. It was small, simple, made of white porcelain with a faint golden line running from the rim to its base. A kintsugi repair, beautiful in its honesty. The crack had not been hidden. It had been illuminated. She picked it up. "How much for this?" she asked. Genji emerged from behind a curtain. He squinted. "That bowl," he said, voice raspy, "is not for sale." "Why?" He shrugged. "It chooses its owner." Mariko tilted her head. "And if it chooses me?" Genji smiled, more sadness than humor. "Then it will stay with you, but be warned, it only stays with those willing to break." Mariko said nothing. She bought the bowl. That evening, she placed it gently on her kitchen altar beside a small candle and a photo of her husband. The picture was from their wedding. He wore a white suit, awkward but smiling, and she, a younger version of herself, looked at the camera with eyes that still believed in permanence. She poured tea into the bowl, steamed rice, a slice of peach. "Itadakimasu," she whispered, and bowed. She didn't cry. Not yet. In truth, Mariko had been living a lie for years. Her husband had died 3 months prior in a car accident. The newspapers said it was quick. The doctors said he felt no pain. But Mariko knew he had been on his way to meet another woman, a lover. She had discovered the messages the week before his death. Words sent at midnight, plans made in secrecy, lies spoken with gentleness. She had not confronted him. She had simply watched him leave that morning with a smile and hot coffee in his thermos. She had waved. And then he died. No confrontation, no closure, only betrayal sealed forever in silence. She had been floating ever since. Until the bowl. That night, as wind passed through the screen doors and the scent of summer lilies filled the air, she heard a sound. A soft crack. She walked into the kitchen. The bowl had split in two. It had not fallen, nothing had touched it, But the golden seam had given way. The crack widened. It lay in perfect halves on the altar, the tea still warm. She stared at it for a long time. Then she wept. For hours. Not just for him, for herself, for the woman she once was, for the life that would never be again, for the apology she would never receive, for the scream she never got to release. She held the two pieces like a prayer. And then, without thinking, she began to mend them. The next morning, she walked to a ceramic shop and asked for lacquer and powdered gold. She spent the day learning kintsugi, tracing each fracture with reverence, not hiding the break, but making it part of the story. It took her 3 days. When she was done, the bowl gleamed anew. The crack now ran wider, more radiant, a river of gold flowing through porcelain. She placed it back on the altar. This time, she did not offer tea. She offered her wedding ring. She whispered, "You are forgiven." But the words were not for him. They were for herself. The Zen Parable. A student once brought a broken bowl to a master and asked, "Shall I throw it away?" The master replied, "Only if you believe your heart would break the same way and not be worth mending." Philosophical reflection. Kintsugi, the art of golden repair, teaches a lesson older than language. That which is broken can still be beautiful, not in spite of the break, but because of it. Zen does not seek perfection in form, but authenticity in presence. Scars are not shameful, they are sacred. The bowl that broke itself was not faulty, it was honest. It broke so that Mariko could begin to feel again. Sometimes it is not trauma that harms us most, but the silence we wrap around it. Psychological insight. Mariko's story reflects a common pattern in grief: the coexistence of love and betrayal, the paralysis of unresolved emotion, and the body's subtle push toward healing through symbolism. Modern trauma therapy acknowledges that healing is often nonlinear. Objects can become conduits for transformation. The bowl acted as an externalization of Mariko's inner fracture. Its break mirrored her suppressed pain. The act of repair became ritual. Ritual became integration. In restoring the bowl, she restored a part of herself. Not the part that loved blindly, but the part that could finally let go without guilt. Meditative closing. Hold your broken places gently. Ask, what in me has cracked that I pretend is still whole? What truth have I sealed in silence, waiting for something to break first? Breathing in, I allow the break. Breathing out, I honor the gold within it. Let what breaks reveal you. Story 6. The Widow of the Train. The train passed once each day through the foothills of Dalat, a low rumble across rusted tracks, cutting through mist and memory. Its horn was always 2 short cries, like a voice choking on goodbye. Locals called it the morning train. They said it had taken someone from almost every house in the village. But only one woman ever returned to the station after losing someone. Her name was Thao. Every year, on the same fog-drenched morning in November, she arrived before dawn. Dressed in white, hair tied back with a faded ribbon, she sat alone on the cracked bench by platform 2, staring not at the train, but at the emptiness where he had once stood. Her husband, Bin, had died there 9 years ago. He was not struck, he did not fall, he had simply vanished. The official report said suicide. The body likely disintegrated beneath the wheels, they told her. It happens sometimes. The force is tremendous. But Thao never believed it. She had been with him that morning. They had eaten sweet potato congee together. He had kissed her forehead. He had told her he would be back by nightfall. Then he boarded the train and never returned. No body, no witness. Only the train whistle, echoing down the valley. Thao had not remarried, had not moved, had not cried in front of anyone. She kept a tiny tea shop by the station, opened each morning at 6, closed at 5. Her smile was soft, her voice gentle, but her eyes were always somewhere else, somewhere past the tracks. That year, on the 9th anniversary, it rained. Thao arrived at the platform with her umbrella, sat on her usual bench, and placed a bundle of offerings beside her: a tin cup, a pair of old gloves, and a folded letter sealed with wax. The station manager, a young man named Dung, watched from inside the booth. He'd worked there only 2 years, but he had already heard the whispers. She waits for a ghost. No man could vanish like that without reason. She's cursed. Dung didn't believe in curses, but something about her made him uneasy. She sat too still, she blinked too rarely, and when the train passed, she never flinched. That morning, as the horn approached, Dung stepped out. He brought her a cup of tea. "You're here early," he said. Thao looked at him and smiled, genuinely, kindly. "It's my husband's day." He hesitated. "I heard the story. I'm sorry." She sipped the tea. "Thank you. He liked oolong." The train's whistle cried in the distance. Dung cleared his throat. "Do you ever wonder what really happened?" She placed the cup down. "No." "Why not?" "Because wondering is a form of holding on." The train roared past, spraying mist and wind across the platform. Dung shielded his face. Thao remained unmoved. When it passed, she reached into her satchel and took out a thermos. She poured a second cup and placed it beside her. Dung looked at the cup, puzzled. "For him?" Thao nodded. "He never drank tea," she said. "But I like to think, if he comes back, he might try it." She stood, bowed toward the tracks, and left the cup there. Dung watched as she walked slowly back to her shop. That evening, when he returned to the bench, the cup was empty. Not spilled, not knocked over, just dry. That night, Dung stayed late at the station. Something tugged at him, a thread of disquiet knotted beneath his ribs. Around midnight, he dozed off in the signal room. At 12:43 a.m., he woke to the sound of footsteps. Soft, rhythmic, wet. He peeked out the window. A man stood on platform 2. He wore a dark overcoat, his back to the station, facing the tracks. "Sir?" Dung called. No answer. The man turned. His face was pale. Not ghostly, just tired. He looked like someone who had not slept in years. His eyes were hollow, but not angry, more like remembering. Then he stepped forward and vanished. No wind, no sound, just absence. Dung ran outside. The platform was empty. The bench was dry. Only the tin cup remained, filled with tea. The next morning, Dung found Thao lighting incense in her shop. He didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, breathing hard. She looked up, nodded, and poured him a cup. "You saw him," she said. He sat. "Yes." "Which way was he facing?" "The sea." She smiled. "That means he's on his way." "To where?" She looked at him with the softness of someone who had grieved fully and come out the other side, not healed, but changed. "Wherever people go when they no longer carry our sorrow." Dung held the tea in both hands. It was warm, fragrant, real. But why appear now, after so long? Thao looked toward the train tracks, just visible through the morning mist. Because someone else finally believed he was more than a ghost. The Zen parable. A monk once lost his brother to war. Every morning he poured 2 cups of tea, one for himself, one for his brother. One day a visitor asked, "Do you still believe he drinks with you?" The monk smiled. He does, but not from the cup. Philosophical reflection. Loss is not always about what leaves us. It is often about what lingers. Zen does not demand that we let go by force. It invites us to sit with what haunts us until it softens into presence. To pour tea not as an illusion, but as a ritual, an offering of continuity, not delusion. Grief is not undone by answers, but by acknowledgement. Thao's yearly return to the station was not denial. It was love, shaped into waiting. Psychological insight. The phenomenon of ambiguous loss, when a person disappears without confirmation of death, is among the most psychologically tormenting forms of grief. There is no closure, no funeral, no final word. In trauma therapy, unresolved grief often seeks ritual as a substitute for certainty. By reenacting meaning through objects, locations, ceremonies, the brain creates a symbolic narrative that allows healing to begin. Thao's tea ceremony, repeated annually, served not as a cry into the void, but as a bridge between love and letting go. The final sign, witnessed by Dung, was not proof of ghosts. It was permission to stop searching. Meditative closing. Grief often walks beside us longer than love. But one day, if we listen, it may whisper, "I have walked far enough." Sit in silence today. Ask, what presents have I held on to, not because they stayed, but because I could not bear their leaving? What ritual might I offer, not to summon them back, but to honor their going? Breathing in, I remember. Breathing out, I release. The train does not return, but the silence it leaves can be sacred. Story 7. The Mirror Room. In the far end of the Horinji temple, hidden behind a cedar door with no handle, there was a room that few ever entered. It was called the Mirror Room. Visitors often missed it altogether. The hallway leading to it was narrow and dim, lined with fading calligraphy and the scent of old incense. There were no signs, no lanterns, no invitation. And yet, some found it. They didn't come seeking it. They came seeking themselves. When the war widow from Hokkaido arrived at the temple with her son's ashes, she found the room. When the businessman from Tokyo, collapsing under the weight of 3 secret affairs, arrived in the middle of the night, he found it. When a monk who had broken his vows returned after 20 years with nothing but silence in his heart, the door opened for him too. No one told them where to go. The room chose them. Inside, it was bare. No statue of the Buddha, no altar, just 4 walls covered in mirrors from floor to ceiling. Old mirrors, some cracked, some cloudy, others clear as still water. There was no furniture. Just one mat in the center, woven from rushes worn soft by knees and time. Those who entered were instructed only to sit and look. For 1 hour. That was all. But most never lasted that long. They would stand, fidget, flee. Some screamed, some wept, some walked out laughing, but with eyes like broken glass. The mirror, it seemed, did not show your face. It showed what you could not name. The first time Mai entered the mirror room, she was 29. She had come to the temple as a volunteer, claiming she wanted to learn calligraphy. But the real reason was folded in her suitcase, a letter she had never sent, addressed to her younger sister, who had died 5 years earlier in what the papers called an accidental overdose. Mai never believed it was an accident. They had not spoken in 2 years. Their last conversation had ended in shouting. Words flung like knives, none of them worth remembering, and all of them unforgettable. After the funeral, Mai locked the grief inside her chest like a house on fire and went on living. Until one morning, she woke up and could no longer look in the mirror. Her own face felt foreign. as if something behind it had broken loose and was trying to escape. The monks didn't question her when she arrived. They simply offered her tea, showed her to a room, and let her wander. She found the mirror room on her 4th day. The door opened as if expecting her. Inside, the silence was dense, not empty, but full, like a mountain holding its breath. She sat on the mat and stared into the glass. At first, she saw nothing strange, just her reflection. Tired eyes, uneven lips, a faint scar above her left eyebrow from childhood. Then the mirror began to shift. It didn't move, but what it showed changed. She saw herself in the hospital waiting room, legs bouncing, mouth dry, her sister lying unconscious behind a wall of glass. Then she saw herself turning away, not walking in, not holding her hand, just turning. The image blurred. Now she was yelling, words she hadn't spoken in years, her reflection's mouth twisted with fury. "You ruin everything! You always need saving! I'm tired of being your net!" She tried to look away, but there were mirrors on all sides. The words echoed, not from the glass, but from her own throat. "I'm tired of being your net!" The next image was quiet. Her sister as a child, sitting on the kitchen floor, blood on her knees, crying. Mai was there, maybe 12 years old, holding her hand, whispering, "I'll always catch you." The scene dissolved. She stared at herself, not as a child, not as an adult, but as someone who had broken a promise and punished herself for it. Her breath trembled. Her chest hurt, not like illness, but like recognition. She did not cry, but the mirror did. Condensation formed along the surface, as if the glass was weeping. Then the door opened. A bell rang softly outside. Her hour had passed. She bowed to the mirrors and left. That evening, she sat in the temple garden, watching koi swim under lotus leaves. She took out the letter, read it once, then burned it. The next day, she asked the head monk, "What is the mirror made of?" He looked at her and said, "Regret," then added, "but lined with truth." The Zen parable. A student once asked the master, "How can I see myself clearly?" The master handed him a polished bowl of water and said, "Wait until the wind stops, the ripples still, and the sky reflects." The student said, "But that may take hours." The master said, "Then wait. If you cannot face your reflection with patience, you are not ready to see." Philosophical reflection. The mirror room is not a place, it is a condition of being. Zen teaches us that the self is not a fixed shape, but a series of reflections, distorted by fear, attachment, and avoidance. We avoid looking directly not because the image is terrifying, but because it is honest. To see yourself without filters is to meet your karma face to face. It is not meant to shame, but to soften. To remind you, you are not only what you've done, you are what you are willing to face. Psychological insight. In psychotherapy, mirrors are metaphors for self-confrontation. Many people project idealized or shame-based identities, avoiding authentic self-awareness due to unresolved trauma, guilt, or internalized judgment. The mirror can be a therapeutic space, a relationship, or a literal reflection where emotional truths are surfaced. Mai's transformation was not in seeing her sister, but in seeing herself in relation to her. In grief, we often fixate on what we lost, but healing requires also seeing who we became because of it. Integration begins when we stop editing our reflection. Meditative closing. Sit before your own reflection today. Do not adjust your posture. Do not correct your expression. Do not look away. Ask, What am I afraid to see in myself because it will demand change? Can I bow to the version of me that broke and chose silence and still remained? Breathing in, I meet my truth. Breathing out, I soften toward it. Let the mirror show you, not who you were, but who you still are. Story 8. The Tattoo of Fire. He arrived in the village just after the rice harvest, when the air still held the scent of smoke and ash. His name was Bao, or at least that's what he told the monks. No one asked for more. His body was lean, covered in worn denim and shadows. He spoke little. He bowed respectfully, offered incense at the main altar, and asked if he could stay for a few weeks to work and listen to the wind. They gave him a room behind the meditation hall. But what they could not ignore was the tattoo. It sprawled across his back, a dragon made of fire, mouth open in a scream, eyes wide with rage. Its tail wrapped around his ribs, its claws reached over his shoulder blades. Wherever Bao went, he wore a long-sleeved shirt, even in the heat. But during evening baths in the stream, villagers whispered. "That tattoo has killed people," one said. "I've seen men like him in prison," said another. The abbot, a kind-eyed monk named Liam, said nothing. He simply watched. Bao worked hard. He rose before dawn, cleaned the temple steps, fetched water from the well, helped the elderly monks carry baskets of vegetables from the field. He joined the evening chants, eyes closed, breathing steady. But he never knelt. He never closed his palms in prayer. And he never removed the tattoo willingly. One morning, a novice named Kien approached him with curiosity sharper than caution. "What does it mean?" he asked, nodding toward the ink beneath Bao's collar. Bao looked at him for a long time, then turned away. "It's not a symbol," he said. "It's a scar." That night, Bao dreamt of the fire. It always came the same way, fast, red, and deafening. He was 17. The alley behind the gambling den was slick with rain. His older brother had dragged him there, bleeding, shouting, terrified. Then came the explosion. Bao remembered grabbing his brother's body, remembered the scream, his own or someone else's, and then the tattoo. He hadn't wanted it. The gang had marked him after, said it was an honor, said it meant the fire chose him. But it didn't feel like honor. It felt like branding. On his 10th day at the temple, Bao asked to see the abbot. They sat together beneath the Bodhi tree. "I want to burn it off," Bao said. Liam poured tea. "The ink?" "Yes." "And what would that prove?" Bao looked down. "That I'm not that person anymore." Liam nodded. "Then perhaps we should burn your hands too, for what they've done." Bao's jaw tensed. "You think I should live with it?" "I think," Liam said gently, "you should learn to see it." Later that week, the abbot asked Bao to join him for a walk up the mountain. They carried nothing, spoke even less. At the summit stood a shrine half swallowed by moss and vines. Inside was a mirror, old, cracked, but still clear. "Take off your shirt," Liam said. Bao hesitated, then obeyed. The dragon stared back at him, but something was different. In the mountain light, its eyes no longer seemed angry. Its mouth no longer screamed. It looked almost tired. "Sit," Liam said. Bao sat. The abbot placed a candle beside the mirror, then said, "Look again." Bao turned. The flame flickered across his back's reflection. The dragon shimmered. Its form bent with his breath, softened with his stillness. "It was fire that marked you," Liam said, "but it's breath that shapes you." That night, Bao stayed long after the stars rose. He traced the edges of the ink with his fingers, not in hate, but in recognition. He began to sit in meditation. He knelt for the first time during evening chants. He started joining the others for calligraphy, painting black ink onto rice paper with careful intention. The first character he painted was doi, sin. The second was muin, vow. Weeks passed. Then, one afternoon, a visitor came to the temple. A young man, twitchy, with narrow eyes and a familiar scar under his chin. He looked at Bao and froze. "Boss?" Bao didn't respond. "Is it you?" "I'm not him," Bao said quietly. "You taught me to fight," the man said, voice cracking. "You told me pain was proof of loyalty." Bao stood. "I was wrong." The man stared at him, then spat. "You betrayed the mark!" Bao nodded, "Yes," and walked away. Later, the abbot found Bao in the garden, pruning the peach trees. "Do you still want to burn it off?" he asked. Bao wiped sweat from his brow. "No," he said, "I want to outlive it." The Zen parable. A warrior once asked a monk, "I have slain, stolen, lied. I am marked by fire and sin. Can I ever be pure?" The monk replied, "Purity is not absence and ash. It is the willingness to breathe again among the embers." Philosophical reflection. The fire does not always come to destroy. Sometimes it comes to reveal. Bao's tattoo was not evil. It was evidence of where he'd been, of who he had been made to be. Zen does not ask us to erase our marks. It invites us to see them without flinching. Only when we stop hating our scars can we start to live beyond them. To burn the ink would have been denial. To breathe with it, that was freedom. Psychological insight. In trauma therapy, the concept of symbolic integration is key. When a survivor reframes a traumatic symbol not by removing it, but by transforming its meaning. Bao's tattoo embodied shame and violence, but through ritual, breath, reflection, and mentorship, he re-narrated its significance. He did not forget his past. He forgave its hold on him. That is not escape. That is liberation. Meditative closing. Where have you tried to burn away your past? What have you branded as unforgivable? Sit with it. Trace it in silence. Ask, can I bear to see what I once tried to destroy? Is there gold beneath the flame, waiting to be seen? Breathing in, I remember. Breathing out, I stay. Let the dragon sleep. Let you awaken. Story 9. The Child Who Drew the Buddha. The village of Anfu was so small it did not appear on most maps. Hidden between two rice valleys and a winding river, it was the kind of place where everyone knew who had cried that morning and whose chickens had gone missing the night before. At the edge of the village stood a weather-stained temple, more humble than holy. Its roof tiles were mismatched and the courtyard was overgrown with moss. Still, the old monks kept it clean, and every dawn they rang the bell to wake the village, not to pray, but to remind them that time, like water, never paused. One autumn morning, a boy arrived. No one knew his name. He didn't speak. His clothes were too big, his hair too short, likely shaved recently. He had no shoes, only a satchel with a half-eaten rice cake, a ragged notebook, and a stick of black charcoal. When the monks found him asleep at the temple gate, curled like a leaf, they brought him in without question. Master Vian, the oldest among them, simply said, "Let him stay until he wishes to leave." The boy never left. He also never spoke. Not a word, not a cry, not a laugh. But he drew. On his first afternoon, he took a piece of rice paper from the offering table, placed it on the floor of the meditation hall, and began to sketch. He drew a face. Not realistic, not proportioned, but haunting. A Buddha with wide, sorrowful eyes, a slight, compassionate smile, and, most unsettling of all, tears. The monks gathered around. "Why is the Buddha crying?" one whispered. Master Vienne only bowed his head, because he sees what we don't. Every day the boy drew. He never used color, only black charcoal, and always the same face, the Buddha in various expressions, angry, grieving, frightened, sleeping, never serene. Soon the villagers came to see. They whispered, they pointed. Some said the boy was possessed. Others said he was enlightened. Still others avoided the temple altogether, claiming the sketches made their dreams restless. One woman, a midwife, approached him and asked softly, "Where are your parents, child?" He looked at her, then down at his charcoal-stained fingers, and drew a house on fire. Nothing more. One afternoon, the district magistrate arrived, a plump man with polished shoes and an air of impatience. He had heard rumors of the mute oracle boy and wanted to ensure no heresy was being cultivated. He demanded to see the drawings. Master Vienne led him through the meditation hall, now filled with dozens of paper sheets tacked to the walls. The Buddha's face stared from every direction. Some images showed him surrounded by balms, others with hands tied behind his back. In one, he was holding a dying animal, in another, a child. "This is blasphemy," the magistrate said. "Is it?" Master Vienne replied. "The Buddha does not suffer. He does not cry." "Then you have not looked deeply." The magistrate ordered the drawings burned. That night, the wind howled through the trees. The next morning, all the papers were gone. Ash in the courtyard, soot on the altar. The boy stood barefoot in the rain, staring at the empty walls. He did not cry. He picked up his charcoal and began again. This time, he drew directly onto the stone wall. Stroke by stroke, over days, a new Buddha emerged, not gentle, not terrifying, but vast. Its eyes were closed. Its mouth was open, not in speech, but in breath. It was unfinished. The boy stopped halfway through the right eye and never touched it again. Winter came. The boy grew thinner. Still, he would not speak. Until one day, he approached Master Vienne and took his hand. With his other hand, he traced a circle in the air. "A wheel?" Vienne asked. The boy nodded, then placed his charcoal in Vienne's palm and walked away. He never returned. Some said he drowned in the river. Others believed he wandered to another village to draw in silence. But the wall remained. And over time, something strange happened. Villagers who visited the temple began to feel things. Some wept without knowing why. Others felt peace in their bones, like they had let go of something long carried. Even the magistrate, returning years later, stood before the wall and could not speak. He bowed. For the first time in his life, he bowed. The Zen Parable. A disciple once asked his master, "Why do I cry during meditation?" The master replied, "Because your soul recognizes something your mind has forgotten." Philosophical reflection. What is the face of awakening? Is it joy, stillness, compassion, or is it something more vulnerable? Zen teaches that enlightenment is not the absence of suffering, but the full presence with it. To witness, without flinching, the whole of human pain. To cry, not from despair, but from understanding. The boy's silent drawings pierced the veil between wisdom and sorrow. He showed that the Buddha, too, may cry, not because he is weak, but because he sees. Psychological insight. The mute boy, in trauma psychology, represents the dissociated child, the one who has witnessed horror so great that words no longer suffice. But his drawings become a therapeutic bridge. Through image, he reclaims narrative. Through the Buddha, he reflects his own wounds. In expressive art therapy, such visualizations often bypass the conscious mind, allowing deeply buried grief to surface safely. The monks provided not just sanctuary, but container, a sacred space where unspoken pain could be honored, not silenced. The unfinished eye on the Buddha was not failure. It was invitation, a mirror left for the world to complete. Meditative closing. There is a drawing inside you, a portrait of your own grief. It waits not to be erased, but seen. Sit quietly. Ask, what pain have I carried in silence that only image or gesture might release? What part of me remains unfinished, waiting for a compassionate gaze? Breathing in, I see. Breathing out, I soften. Even the Buddha cries, and so may we. Story 10. The Woman Who Refused to Die. In a remote province nestled between green hills and mist-veiled forests, there was a hospital no one wanted to enter. It wasn't haunted. It was forgotten. Paint peeled from the walls like shedding skin. The air carried a faint metallic scent, and the windows were too high to see out of, designed not to let light in, but to keep something from escaping. The place was called the Hospice of Mercy, but no one ever left it. Except one. Her name was Lon. They said she had died 5 times and came back each time. No one knew exactly how old she was. Some claimed 30, others said 50. Her body was slight, worn like old paper, but her eyes held something unkillable. Not strength, not defiance, witness. She had seen things, deep things, that never fully returned to the surface. The first time she died, she had swallowed bleach. The second time, she stepped into a river with stones tied to her waist. The third, she hung from the rafters of a rented room. The fourth was pills. The fifth was silence. Each time she was found, pulled back, saved barely. No one could understand why she kept surviving. Her heart stopped, but her breath returned. Her skin went cold, but she woke. The nurses stopped asking why. They just called her the Refuser. When Sister Min arrived as a volunteer chaplain, she had already heard the stories. She was young, only 26, freshly trained in both palliative care and Buddhist chaplaincy. She believed in compassion, in the power of presence, in the healing touch of listening. But she had never met anyone like Lon. She knocked on the door of room 304 with gentle knuckles. Lon was sitting in bed, staring at the wall, a blanket over her lap, bare feet visible and still. "I'm Sister Min," she said. "I'm here to sit with you, if that's all right." Lan didn't turn. "You're too bright," she said. "You'll go dim soon enough." Min sat anyway. She didn't ask questions, just folded her hands in her lap and let the silence stretch. After nearly 30 minutes, Lan spoke. "Do you know what's worse than dying?" Min waited. "Coming back to a life you already buried." In the weeks that followed, they met often. Min listened. Lan spoke, but only in fragments, pieces of a story stitched together like a robe full of holes. Abuse, poverty, betrayal, a daughter taken away, a husband who vanished, a mother who prayed her dead. "Every time I tried to die," Lan said once, "I woke up angrier, not because I was still alive, but because life was still the same." Min asked gently, "And yet, you're still here?" Lan smirked. "Not because I want to be." Min looked down. Maybe not yet, but you're still watching, and that matters. Lan looked at her, long and hard. Do you think I'm cursed? No, Min said. I think you're unresolved. One afternoon, Lan requested incense. Men brought a stick of sandalwood, lit it, and placed it in a cracked ceramic holder beside the bed. Lan closed her eyes. The first time I saw the Buddha, she said, was in a dream. He had no mouth, only eyes, watching me drown. Min didn't speak. Lan continued. He didn't save me, just watched, like he wanted me to choose. Min nodded slowly. And what did you choose? Lan opened her eyes. I chose to hate him. That night, a storm rolled through the hills. Lan screamed in her sleep. Min, asleep in the hallway cot, ran in. Lan sat upright in bed, eyes wild. I was in a room with no door, she gasped. The walls were made of hands, reaching, grabbing, but not to hurt me. They were my hands, all of them, every version of me I'd left behind. Min knelt beside the bed. You saw yourself. Lan began to cry, not softly, but like a flood breaking through a dam. I don't know who I am anymore. Min held her hand. You're the one who came back, again and again. That counts for something. In the days that followed, Lan began to change. Not dramatically, but the way people change when they stop fighting their ghosts. She asked for a mirror. She asked for paper. She began to write, not letters, not poems, just words, bits of memory, fragments of pain, names she had forgotten, feelings she could not contain. One morning, Min found her sitting in the window light. She had drawn a door. It was simple, just a rectangle, no handle, no frame. But inside it was written, I forgive you. When Min asked who the forgiveness was for, Lan simply whispered, all the people I became to survive. A week later, she refused food. She refused water. She closed her eyes and said, I'm done now. Min asked, are you sure? Lan smiled. For the first time. 3 days passed. Then she slipped away, peacefully, silently, like a leaf finally letting go of its branch. They buried her beneath a tree on the temple grounds. Men placed the drawing on her grave. The wind carried incense through the grass, and the air, for once, did not resist. The Zen Parable. A woman asked a Zen master, how do I stop wanting to die? The master replied, don't. Let that part of you die, the part that seeks escape. Bury it, then sit beside its grave until what is true begins to speak. Philosophical reflection. To refuse death is not always heroic. Sometimes it is just unfinished truth. Zen sees death not as an end, but as a threshold. Some cross it before they die. Others die many times before the body finally follows. The question is not, why did I survive, but what have I not yet faced? Lan was not cursed. She was not broken. She was brave enough to return to her suffering until it no longer held her hostage. That is awakening. That is liberation. Psychological insight. Lan's repeated suicide attempts mirror what psychology calls chronic suicidal ideation, a symptom not only of despair but of inner fragmentation. Often, people who cannot die are those who have not yet integrated the parts of themselves they abandoned. In trauma-informed therapy, we speak of exiled selves, pieces of the psyche hidden due to shame, pain, or survival. Lan's final dream of a room of hands was not madness. It was healing. She was being welcomed back by the versions of herself she once rejected. To choose life does not mean joy. Sometimes it means truth. Meditative closing. What part of you has tried to die? Not by body, but by silence. What self have you buried, hoping never to feel again? Sit gently with your breath. Ask, can I stay long enough to see what lives beneath my suffering? Can I forgive the version of me that once only knew escape? Breathing in, I honor my pain. Breathing out, I release my shame. The door is within, not to flee, but to return. Story 11. The Sound of Falling Bamboo. The silence before the rain. In a remote village nestled against a dense forest, there was a temple known only to those who sought silence. The monks there never recruited, never advertised, and never turned anyone away. To enter was to disappear, not in body, but in the noise of one's mind. Here, the wind was louder than the world, and the bamboo groves whispered secrets to those who listened. The youngest monk, Issei, had come not for enlightenment, but for escape. His city life had fractured after the sudden death of his wife in a car accident. Guilt hung on him like damp clothes. She had called him moments before the crash, begging him to pick her up because she felt uneasy. He had ignored it. He was in a meeting. Now, the silence of the temple was all that kept him from unraveling. The abbot, Master Ryoku, was a man of few words and fewer expressions. Yet his presence had gravity. One afternoon, Ryoku handed Issei a broom and pointed toward the bamboo grove. Sweep the path, every morning, every night. That was all. I Too, a Zen parable, the bamboo that broke the wind. Ryoku once told Issei a story. In the time of the old kingdoms, a warlord razed a village, cutting down the bamboo grove that shielded it from the wind. But one stalk survived, bent low by the storm, yet unbroken. Years passed. The warlord returned, older and full of sorrow, and he found the lone bamboo standing, now the center of a new forest. He asked a monk nearby, "Why did this one live?" The monk replied, "It never stood against the wind. It bowed." Issei didn't understand it. He felt as if he was the bamboo that had snapped when the storm came. 3. The weight of unheard grief. Every day, Issei swept the grove. At first, mechanically. The sound of the broom against stone was the only rhythm in his chest. He spoke to no one. He barely ate. But the path always had fallen leaves, always needed sweeping, just as his thoughts always fell, one by one. One dusk, rain began to fall, but Issei kept sweeping. Ryoku appeared behind him. "Why are you still sweeping?" "The path is never clean," Issei said. "The leaves keep falling." Ryoku nodded. "Yes, just as thoughts return, just as guilt returns. You cannot sweep to silence them. You can only notice them fall." Issei stared at the wet leaves. The next morning, he still swept, but now he listened to the sound of bamboo creaking, of rain dripping, of his breath. 4. Psychological reflection, the bamboo mind. Guilt is the mind's resistance to impermanence. Issei wanted to change the past by clinging to it, revisiting it, punishing himself. But the bamboo doesn't cling, it bends. The psychological paralysis he endured was a symptom of trying to stand firm against what could no longer be changed. In therapeutic terms, Issei's healing lay not in repression, nor in justification, but in radical acceptance. The act of sweeping wasn't to erase his pain, but to observe it, again and again, until it became less foreign and more human. The leaves never stopped falling, but he stopped trying to stop them. A meditative closing. One early spring morning, after many months, Issei heard a loud crack, the sound of a bamboo stalk splitting in the wind. Yet it did not fall. It bent just low enough to sway, then rose back with the gust. He looked up, smiled, and whispered for the first time in years, "I understand." That evening, he placed a single stalk of fallen bamboo on Ryoku's doorstep. The master picked it up, tapped it on the stone, and said, "A mind that listens grows strong." That night, Issei sat in the grove, closed his eyes, and meditated, not on silence, but on the sound of falling bamboo. Breathe with them. Let them go. Reflection prompt. What are the leaves that keep falling in your life? Can you watch them fall without trying to catch or control them? Zen quote. Let go or be dragged. Zen proverb. Meditation guide. Tonight, sit quietly and listen to the sounds around you. Each sound is a bamboo leaf falling, impermanent yet real. Breathe with them. Let them go. Story 12. The Monk Who Burned the Scriptures. The ashes beneath the altar. In the high mountains of Izu, where clouds met the earth like old lovers, there was a secluded monastery named Sankain. Among its dozen monks was an old man known as Gento. He never spoke, never taught, and never bowed to anyone except the wind. While others copied sutras and tended to gardens, Gento carried one task. Every morning at dawn, he lit incense before a plain wooden box sealed beneath the altar. No one asked what was inside. That is, until the arrival of novice Hideo. Hideo was bright, fervent, and overflowing with philosophical questions. Sent by his parents to train in discipline, he approached Zen like a school exam. He read every scroll, memorized every verse, and questioned every ritual. One day, after overhearing rumors, he asked the abbot, "What's inside Gento's box?" The abbot replied only, "Truth." That night, Hideo's curiosity became unbearable. 2. A Zen parable. The Monk and the Fire. The next day, Hideo approached Gento during his incense ritual. "What is inside the box?" he asked directly. Gento didn't reply. "I've studied the Lotus Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, and all the Mahayana teachings. Is it a relic, a sacred text, a scroll of enlightenment?" Still silence. That night, unable to sleep, Hideo crept into the shrine alone. He lifted the box from beneath the altar. It was lighter than he expected. His heart pounded. Opening it, he found ashes. No scrolls, no relics, just fine gray-white ash. Stunned, he asked the abbot the next morning, "What is this? Ash from a cremation?" The abbot smiled gently. "That is the burned remains of all the scriptures Gento wrote over 50 years. Every insight he believed, every verse he copied, he burned them himself." Hideo stood dumbfounded. "Why?" The abbot turned toward the altar and said, "To remind us not to cling to the finger pointing at the moon." 3. The war between knowing and being. In the weeks after, Hideo's practice was disrupted. His thoughts no longer sat quietly. They spun. If scriptures are to be burned, why write them? If teachings are impermanent, how do we learn it all? He tried meditating harder, reading deeper, fasting longer. But it all felt hollow. One morning, he snapped at another monk during chores. That evening, Ryunin, an elder monk, sat beside him. "You're angry." "I'm confused." "Because of the ashes?" "Because none of this makes sense." Ryunin nodded. "That's the first honest thing you've said since arriving." Hideo looked down. "If Gento burned all his teachings, what's the point of mine?" Ryunin answered with a half-smile. "Gento didn't burn truth. He burned attachment. He burned the ego hiding behind wisdom." 4. Psychological reflection. Burning the self-image. What Hideo faced was the collapse of cognitive certainty. His mind, wired for structure and success, confronted Zen's greatest challenge, unlearning. In modern psychology, this aligns with ego disintegration, a process where one's identity structure, the I know, I am, I believe, is gently deconstructed. not to destroy the self, but to loosen its grip. Often, intense intellectualization, as with Hideo, is a defense against vulnerability, death, and unknowing. Gento's burning of scripture was not nihilism, it was purification, a symbolic rejection of spiritual pride, of grasping for enlightenment like a prize. It reflected what many therapists call radical presence, to let go of ideas about life and meet life directly. The box of ashes was not a tomb, it was an invitation. 5. The path of no path. One cold morning, Hideo returned to Gento and bowed deeply. "I still don't understand," he whispered, "but I'm ready to stop needing to." Gento looked up for the first time in weeks. With an almost imperceptible nod, he pointed at the broom by the door. "Begin here." From then on, Hideo swept leaves, chopped wood, boiled rice, without seeking meaning in each act, but also without rejecting its worth. His mind still asked questions, but they no longer demanded answers. Slowly, the words he memorized faded. In their place arose silence, stillness, and strange contentment. One night, he dreamt of a bonfire, pages burning in orange light, and in the fire, he saw his own face smiling, dissolving into smoke. V. A meditative closing. Years later, Gento passed quietly in his sleep. At his funeral, the abbot removed the box of ashes and placed it on the pyre. As the fire rose, the monks stood in silence, not in mourning, but in presence. Hideo, now middle-aged, whispered to a young novice beside him, "Everything we need is already burning." Reflection prompt. What are the scriptures you cling to in your identity? Can you imagine letting them turn to ash, not out of loss, but liberation? Zen quote, "When you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." Zen koan. Tonight, light a candle and watch the flame. Imagine one belief you hold tightly about yourself, your worth, or your path. Visualize offering it to the flame, not to destroy it, but to free your hand from grasping. Story 13. The Sound of a Single Shoe. I. The Missing Footsteps. In a quiet mountain village surrounded by dense cedar forests lived an old Zen master named Koma. His temple, Ensho-in, was humble. No gold statues, no large bells, only the sounds of birds, the crackle of firewood, and the rustling of wind through pine needles. Master Koma had one strange habit. Every morning before dawn, he would walk a loop around the temple grounds, but only wearing one wooden sandal. The clack of a single geta echoed through the silent courtyard like a ghost with an uneven gait. Clack, silence. Clack, silence. At first, the monks thought it was senility. Then some thought it was symbolic, a koan in itself. Others whispered it was an act of mourning, but no one dared to ask. Until Jun. 2. The young monk and the question. Jun was new to the temple, barely 16. He had a bright mind and a sharp tongue. On his third morning at Ensho-in, he couldn't sleep. He heard the strange rhythm again. Clack, silence, clack. He got up, crept to the temple door, and saw Master Koma limping through the fog in one shoe, the other foot bare on the freezing stone. Unable to hold back, Jun bowed deeply and asked, "Master, why do you walk with one sandal?" Master Koma looked at him, then calmly said, "To hear the sound of the other." Jun blinked, "But there is no sound from the other." "Exactly," the master replied, and disappeared into the mist. 3. The Zen Parable, the Empty Half. That day, Jun thought of nothing else. What did it mean to hear something that wasn't there? He consulted the library, pored over koans, questioned other monks. Some shrugged. One said, It's about duality, form and emptiness. Another said, he's reminding himself of the incompleteness of knowledge. Jun wasn't satisfied. That night, he waited again. As the clack of the geta echoed once more, Jun slipped on his sandals and followed Master Koma. They walked together in silence through the forested paths behind the temple. Then, unexpectedly, the master stopped. "Jun," he said, "what do you hear?" Jun hesitated. "I hear your sandal." "Do you hear mine?" "No." "Then how do you know it is there?" Jun was silent. "Perhaps," said the master, "you listen too loudly." 4. Philosophical commentary: The wisdom of absence. What Master Koma practiced was the teaching of negative space, not just in sound, but in life. Zen often reminds us that what is missing holds just as much meaning as what is present. The space between notes in music, the pause between breaths in meditation, the silence between words in a conversation, the shoe that makes no sound. In the West, we often fill emptiness: noise, schedules, entertainment, thoughts. But Zen invites us to feel the absence. In doing so, we discover a paradox. The emptiness is not empty. It is full of presence, stillness, possibility. Master Koma's one sandal walk was not about oddity. It was a daily ritual of remembering. Awareness is not only about what is, but about what is not. 5. Psychological insight: Listening to the inner silence. From a psychological lens, Jun's journey mirrors the tension between active cognition and receptive awareness. Most of us, like Jun, rely on intellectual tools to understand the world. We analyze, label, question, compare. These tools are powerful, but they can become prisons when overused. They block the subtle music of silence, the whisper of the unconscious, the signals of intuition. Zen practice, like Koma's walk, retrains the mind to listen without chasing, to hear not only words but pauses, not only thoughts but the space between them. This shift, known in contemplative psychology as meta-awareness, leads to a deeper connection with the present. It allows us to be with what is, without needing to define or change it. In essence, Koma was teaching Jun the art of listening to the other shoe, the part of life that doesn't shout. The turning. Weeks passed. Jun no longer asked questions. He simply woke each morning and listened, not only to Koma's footsteps, but to the wind through the trees, the rustle of his own robe, the silence of dawn. One morning, he did not hear the clack. Alarmed, he rushed out and found Koma sitting on a stone, both feet bare. The master smiled. "You didn't hear me today." "No? But did you listen?" Jun understood. It wasn't about the sound. It was about presence. That evening, Jun left his journal open on his mat. On the page he had written, "The silence of the second sandal follows me everywhere." 7. A meditative closing. Years later, when Master Koma passed away, the monks found his sandals placed neatly outside his room. Only one was worn. The other was pristine, never used. On the temple gate, Jun carved a single phrase: "To hear what is not there, you must stop listening to what is." Reflection prompt: What parts of your life feel silent or missing? Can you sit with them, not as problems to solve, but as spaces to listen? Zen quote: "The sound of one hand clapping." Zen koan. Meditation guide: Sit in silence for 10 minutes. Focus on the absence of noise. Each time a sound arises, notice it, then return to the silence after it fades. Notice how the mind reacts to nothingness. What does the silence say? Story 14. The Bell of Regret. In a remote mountain temple, where fog drifted like wandering spirits and the wind carried whispers of ancient chants, an old bell hung silently in the courtyard. It was no longer rung for ceremonies or prayers. Instead, it was known as the Bell of Regret. Locals avoided even looking at it. Tatsuo, a retired city banker in his late 50s, had arrived at this temple after a breakdown. Once a ruthless financer, he had made a name and a fortune by dismantling smaller companies and laying off thousands. But he had lost his wife to illness, and his estranged son had vanished without a trace. His wealth brought him neither sleep nor peace. The city suffocated him, so he came to the mountains, seeking a silence he didn't yet understand. The monks welcomed him without question, as they always did. But the abbot, Master Enshin, made one unusual request. Every morning, at dawn, you must ring the Bell of Regret. Only once, and only you may do it. Tatsuo agreed, puzzled but obedient. On the first morning, the sound startled him. The deep, mournful vibration seemed to pass through his chest, as if drawing out something hidden inside. The other monks continued sweeping the courtyard as if nothing had happened. Tatsuo asked one of them why no one else rang the bell. The monk smiled. Because it tolls only for those who carry it. Carry what? Regret. 2. Zen Parable Within. That evening, Master Enshin told Tatsuo a story. A young warrior once visited a monk claiming he had conquered many lands but could not find peace. The monk gave him a bell made of clay and said, "Ring this when your heart is empty." The warrior laughed, "My heart is full of victory." Years later, the warrior returned, his eyes hollow. He rang the bell and wept. The monk asked, "Why now?" The warrior said, "Because today I remembered the cries of those I trampled to win." Enshin looked at Tatsuo, who remained silent, his jaw clenched. 3. Philosophical reflection. Regret is a shadow of the past cast upon the present. It is memory turned inward, a kind of spiritual corrosion. Yet, in Zen, regret is not to be buried, denied, or drowned in distraction. It is to be witnessed, fully, openly, even gratefully. The bell of regret was not there to shame or punish. It was not a symbol of sorrow, but of awareness. It existed to remind the one who rang it that regret is not weakness, but the root of transformation. To carry regret with mindfulness is to let it become a teacher. To avoid it is to remain its prisoner. 4. Psychological commentary. Tatsuo began to change. Each morning, the act of striking the bell became more than ritual. It became confession. With every deep echo, he remembered a face. A mother weeping outside a bank he closed. His wife calling out his name in her final hours while he took a call. His son's silence on the last day they spoke. These memories were once locked away. Now they surfaced with painful clarity, but not to torment him. They softened him. He began helping in the kitchen, scrubbing floors, offering silent bows to villagers who came for tea. One afternoon, a boy arrived with a small letter. It was from his son. "I heard you left the city. I heard you stopped pretending to be a mountain of a man. I've spent years hating you. Now I just wonder if you're still in there somewhere." No address, no number, but it was enough. That night, Tatsuo did not sleep. He sat beneath the stars, listening to the distant wind. The next morning, as he rang the bell, tears rolled down his cheeks for the first time in 20 years. 5. Meditative closing. When we run from regret, we remain fragmented. But when we face it, not to wallow, but to understand, we are finally made whole. In Zen, to truly ring the bell is not just to remember sorrow, but to become empty enough that healing echoes through. Let the bell ring in you, not as punishment, but as reminder. You are not your past. You are the silence that listens when the bell has faded. Meditation prompt. Sit in silence and recall a moment of regret, not to judge it, but to hold it gently like a child in pain. What lesson has it been trying to offer you all these years? Zen quote. To acknowledge regret is not to cling to the past, but to plant the seed of compassion in the present. Master Enshin. Story 15. The Lotus in the Ashes. When Sayuri's house burned down, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood barefoot in the gravel path, watching the flames consume the wooden frame of her memories. The fire had started in the dead of night. By dawn, all that was left was blackened stone and smoldering silence. Neighbors gathered in respectful distance. Some brought rice. Others offered to call her son, now living in the city. Sayuri refused them gently. Her son hadn't visited in 3 years. No phone call in 8 months. She bowed to each neighbor with a kind, practiced smile, then walked past the ruins into the forest path that led to the temple on the hill. At the top sat a humble Zen temple, where the morning bell had just rung. Sayuri had not been here in decades. As a girl, she had studied sutras under the previous abbot. Now she returned not for answers, but for the silence between them. She found Master Genzo raking sand into perfect circles. He did not look up. "You've come home," he said. She sat on the wooden veranda, soot still on her kimono. "My house burned. I heard. I don't know where to go. You've arrived." Zen Parable Within. That evening, the master served her tea. In the flickering light of the oil lamp, he told her a tale. Long ago, in a kingdom plagued by war, a woman's home was burned to the ground. Her husband perished, and she was left with only a single seed, gifted by a monk during a kindness she had long forgotten. In despair, she wandered the lands until she came to a pond filled with mud and decay. She planted the seed in the filth. Years later, travelers came upon a magnificent lotus blooming from that very pond. It was said the woman never spoke again, but smiled often. When asked what wisdom she had found, she pointed to the flower and said, "This was always inside me. The fire only showed me where to plant it." Sayuri held her teacup without drinking. The silence pressed like a question, but the answer was not in words. Philosophical reflection. Destruction is often misunderstood as an end. In Zen, we understand it differently. Not all burning is punishment. Sometimes it is purification. When the structures of identity, attachment, and comfort collapse, what remains is the raw field where awakening can occur. A house is not a home. A home is not a self. And the self? It is not what we think it is. The fire that takes away everything we thought we needed may leave behind the exact conditions for a different kind of growth. We build our lives around form, possessions, family, roles. But form is impermanent. When form burns, what remains is essence. What remains is the chance to live without illusion. 4. Psychological commentary. For Sayuri, the fire did not just consume wood and paper. It forced her to confront the truth she had long avoided. Her life had become a waiting room. Waiting for her son to call. Waiting for a past that would not return. Waiting for grief to finish speaking. Now, stripped of everything familiar, she had no distractions left. And in that emptiness, something ancient stirred. A silence she remembered from childhood mornings in the zendo, when breath and bell aligned in stillness. She did not return to the village. She remained at the temple, first helping in the kitchen, then cleaning the shrine, eventually sitting in zazen for hours as the sun arced across the floorboards. Each night she lit incense, not for the dead, but for the parts of herself that had been consumed in the fire. The resentful wife, the clinging mother, the woman who defined her worth by who needed her. In their place arose something else, something like peace. Not happiness, not hope, just presence. Master Genzo, in his usual cryptic way, offered her no praise. Only one day, after weeks of silence, he said, "You've stopped asking why. That's a good beginning." 5. Meditative closing. Loss is not only grief, it is also grace. The ashes of the old self are fertile ground. From them, the lotus of awareness can rise, not in spite of the suffering, but because of it. Let your pain be the pond. Let your breath be the root. Let your patience be the sun. Do not fear the fire. Sometimes it is the teacher you never knew you needed. Meditation prompt. Sit quietly and recall a moment of great loss. Rather than replaying the event, ask yourself, what truth was revealed in what was taken away? Stay with the question, not for answers, but for the silence that follows. Zen quote, "Only after the fire can we see what was never wood." Master Genzo. Story 16. The sound of a single thread. In the ancient city of Kyoto, nestled among the winding back streets and hidden gardens, lived an old man named Aokiji. He was known not for wealth or reputation, but for weaving silk threads so fine they shimmered like mist. Every morning, before the temple bell rang, he would sit beneath the red maple tree in his courtyard, unraveling broken kimono silk into single threads, twisting them into new life. He lived alone. His wife had passed many springs ago, and their only child, a daughter named Yuna, had left for Tokyo and never returned. Neighbors whispered that grief had made him quiet, though he still smiled gently to passers-by. Some said he spoke to his loom as if it were alive. But what none knew, what even Aokiji himself barely understood, was that with each thread he was not only weaving cloth, he was weaving memory, regret, and eventually release. One autumn, a stranger arrived, a young monk in plain robes, seeking shelter for the night. Aokiji, as always, offered warm rice and silence. The monk watched as Aokiji worked, hands slow and precise. "What are you making?" he asked. Aokiji answered without looking up, "A gift that can't be seen." 2. Zen Parable Within. That night, after tea, the monk told a story. There was once a master weaver who could spin silk so fine that a single thread would vanish in the sunlight. One day his apprentice asked, "Why do you spend so long on what the world cannot even see?" The master replied, "Because only what cannot be seen will endure." The apprentice was confused. So the master gave him a robe woven from invisible thread and said, "Wear this when your heart is broken." Years later, after losing his home, his parents, and even his voice, the apprentice wrapped the unseen robe around his shoulders. He wept into it, and the thread did not dissolve. It held him, quietly, gently. And in that silence, he felt whole again. When the story ended, Aokiji said nothing, but his fingers, resting on his loom, trembled slightly, like a string pulled too tight. 3. Philosophical reflection. In Zen, we speak often of emptiness, not as a void, but as space. Space where meaning arises not from form, but from formlessness. The finest thread is not the one that dazzles, but the one that disappears. That which supports without showing. That which holds even after the hand lets go. Life is like this. We believe we are bound by our visible attachments, family, roles, accomplishments. But it is the unseen threads, love that expects nothing, forgiveness that is never spoken, patience that bears no name, that give life its quiet strength. To weave is to understand impermanence. Each crossing of the thread is a letting go, and yet, in the letting go, we make a pattern. 4. Psychological commentary. Aokiji's daily weaving was not merely habit, it was ritualized mourning. He never said it aloud, but he believed Yuna left because of him. There had been an argument, harsh words said in pride and fear. She had dreamed of becoming a violinist. He, raised in war-torn hunger, couldn't understand such ambition. He wanted her safe, stable, anchored. Instead, she vanished into the city, chasing melodies he would never hear. Every silk thread he twisted was an apology he never voiced. Every robe a prayer stitched in silence. But as he aged, something in his grief changed. It softened. He began to feel not guilt, but gentleness. Toward her, toward himself. The monk's presence stirred something long buried. That night, long after the monk had gone to sleep, Aokiji sat by the fire and looked at his loom. He reached behind the wood beam and drew out an old letter. Yuna's last note, unopened. His hands trembled. And finally, after 22 years, he broke the seal. Inside was only a single sentence. "Oto-san, I hope one day you will hear what I could never say in words." He read it again and again. And then he wept, not for what was lost, but for the thread that had always remained. 5. Meditative closing. There are silences that wound, and there are silences that heal. The sound of a single thread, barely heard, barely seen, can bind hearts across time, across anger, across lifetimes. To live is to weave. Each act of kindness, each pause before speaking in anger, each breath offered in stillness, these are our threads. We may never know who they hold, but they hold nonetheless. Aokiji passed away in winter, peacefully, in his sleep. When neighbors came to clean the house, they found hundreds of cloth bundles, each one wrapped around a single word stitched in delicate gold thread. Love, sorry, stay, safe, dream, free. And one, sent anonymously to a Tokyo address, simply said, "I hear you now." Meditation prompt. Close your eyes and imagine a thread running from your heart to someone you've lost, whether through death, distance, or silence. Do not try to fix or speak. Just breathe. Hold the thread gently. Let it be. Zen quote, "The invisible thread is the strongest cord." Zen saying. Story 17. The Garden Beneath the Ashes. In the outskirts of Kiso Valley, there once stood a village that had been buried by fire. A decade before, a raging wildfire, started by a lightning strike, worsened by wind, swept down the slopes and reduced the wooden homes and shrines to cinders. Survivors fled to neighboring provinces, taking only what they could carry. All except one, an old woman named Chio. She stayed. People thought her mad. What use was staying among ruins? But Chio was quiet and persistent. Each day she walked the burnt fields with a basket and rake. She gathered ash as if it were gold. She dug, tended, and watered. She said she was growing something. A monk once passed through and asked, "What are you planting in a place where nothing grows?" Chio replied, "Roots that don't fear fire." That evening, the monk offered her shelter at a temple up north, but she declined and instead shared an old story. A young man once sought the wisdom of a mountain monk after losing everything in a flood. "I've lost my home, my family, my land," he cried. "What can I build upon now?" The monk handed him a bowl of ash and said, "Build from this." The young man was angry. "Ash is nothing." The monk smiled. "It is what remains after all that is false has burned away." That night, the man slept beside the embers. In his dream, he saw a flower blooming not from soil, but from memory, rooted not in earth, but in sorrow that had softened into wisdom. When he woke, he began to rebuild, not as he had before, but from stillness. Chio looked up at the stars and whispered, "Fire teaches what the sun forgets." 3. Philosophical reflection. We often think of destruction as the end, but Zen reminds us everything that ends is simply returning. Fire is both destroyer and purifier. It strips away illusion. It reveals what lies beneath structure, beneath our expectations, our pride, our clinging. In life, we lose many things: jobs, people, homes, identity. But the question is never, how do I get it all back? The deeper koan is, what was ever truly mine? Ashes do not grieve. They settle. They wait. In them lie minerals, memory, and silence. They ask nothing, and yet they contain the entire potential of rebirth. To plant in ash is an act of defiant love. It is to believe that life is not what we build, but what remains when we have nothing left to protect. 4. Psychological commentary. Chio had lost her son in the fire. He was a teacher at the village school, a quiet boy who never married, who cared more for children's laughter than for his own future. That morning, he had run back to rescue the sacred scrolls stored in the classroom. He never returned. At first, Chio refused to speak of it. She wandered the remains, fingers bloodied from unearthing charred wood. People tried to help her relocate. She refused. They brought offerings, clothing, letters. She said, "Leave me with the earth." But her grief did not calcify. It transformed. Instead of drowning in sorrow, she channeled it into daily tending. She mixed ash with compost. She collected seeds. She whispered names into the wind. In spring, the first green shoot appeared, wild mustard, clinging to scorched gravel. She cried, not from sadness, but awe. Grief is not meant to be erased. It is meant to be honored. The garden she grew over 10 years was not lush in the traditional sense. It had no symmetry, no fences, but it breathed, it swayed. Each plant told a story of fire, patience, and tenderness. Grief, like soil, is enriched by what has fallen apart. 5. Meditative closing. When the monk returned 5 years later, he found that the valley had changed. Not rebuilt, but reborn. Where once stood ash and ruin, now grew a wild, living sanctuary. Mountain herbs, fire poppies, yamabuki flowers. Birds nested in hand-carved boxes nailed to surviving trees. Children from nearby villages came to learn how to plant without fear. Chio was still there. Older, slower, but glowing like the coals that stay warm long after flame. She said to him, "This is not a garden of beauty, it is a garden of remembering." She handed him a handful of ash and smiled. "Take this back to your temple, add it to your incense." Then she whispered, "From what was burned, we rise singing." Meditation prompt. Close your eyes. Imagine the thing you once lost that changed your life, whether a person, a place, or a dream. Visualize it turning to ash. Then watch that ash fall gently into a field. Watch patiently. What begins to grow there? Watch patiently. Zen quote, "Only what the fire cannot burn is truly yours." Story 18. The Mirror That Swallowed Sound. In a remote mountain town known for its echo, there stood an abandoned tea house no one dared enter. The villagers called it Nyafan the Echo House, a place once filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of teacups. But 30 winters ago, something happened. One evening, during a poetry gathering, a traveler sang a melody so beautiful it was said the mountain itself went silent to listen. The moment the final note ended, the tea house never echoed again. No whisper, no breath, no sound at all would bounce back from its walls. It was as if something had swallowed the echo. Only the blind monk Rokan dared enter, carrying with him a single possession, a round, antique mirror wrapped in cotton cloth. He stepped into the tea-house and bowed, as though greeting an invisible host. Then he whispered, "I've come not to break the silence, but to understand who is listening." Zen Parable Within. That night, Ryokan shared a story with the wind, though no one else was there to hear. A man once visited a Zen temple deep in the forest. The master there handed him a mirror and said, "Tell me what you see." "Myself," the man replied. "Look deeper," the master said. The man looked again. "I see my face, my eyes." "Look again," the master insisted. Frustrated, the man glared at the mirror. "I see only what I already know," he shouted. The master took the mirror, turned it toward the empty forest. The mirror does not choose what to show, it receives. When your mind is like this, without judgment, without clinging, it will reflect the world as it is. Only then can you begin to hear what has always been speaking. The man asked, "Hear what?" "The sound beneath sound," said the master, "that which echoes even in silence." 3. Philosophical reflection. Silence is not the absence of sound. In Zen, it is the presence of complete attention. The echo house did not lose its echo. It stopped reflecting the noise of the world because something deeper was being called for. Most people seek sound, affirmation, agreement, proof that they exist through noise. But Zen teaches that real echo comes from within. When you speak to the world from your ego, the response you hear is distortion. But when you speak from emptiness, the response is truth. The greatest mirrors do not reflect the surface. They show what lies behind the face, beneath the voice, within the stillness. What is the echo of a life that has let go of needing to be heard? 4. Psychological commentary. Rokan had once been a gifted orator. In his youth, he could speak for hours, captivating, charming, charismatic. Crowds would sit under moonlight to hear his stories, his poems, his teachings. But slowly, he began to notice something strange. The more beautifully he spoke, the more empty he felt afterward. Applause echoed, praise echoed, but meaning did not. Then, one evening, after delivering a powerful Dharma talk, he walked alone toward a stream. The stars shimmered. He looked into the water and saw only distortion. He whispered to the stream, "Why can I no longer feel what I say?" The stream replied, not with words, but by silencing its flow. It was then he realized, the deepest truths are not spoken. They are held, felt, absorbed like the moon in a still pond. From that day forward, Rokan began to speak less, to listen more, to carry with him the old mirror, not to see his face, but to remember to reflect, not project. When he heard of the echo house, he understood. It was not broken. It had transcended. 5. Meditative closing. The next morning, villagers noticed something. Inside the echo house, there was no sound. But outside, birds gathered, not to chirp, but to sit in silence. Wind moved through the trees, but did not rustle the leaves. Even the river below slowed its roar. Silence was not absence. It had become presence. Ryokan emerged from the tea-house and placed the mirror at its entrance. He bowed and said, "Whoever looks into this mirror must ask, not what they want to see, but what they are ready to receive." Then he whispered to a child nearby, "When the world stops echoing, it means it wants you to listen differently. The mountain does not echo every shout, only those spoken from the heart." Meditation prompt. Sit in a quiet place. Close your eyes. Instead of focusing on the sounds you hear, Focus on what you do not hear, the gaps, the spaces. What feelings arise in the silence? What echoes within you? Zen quote, "Sound is the shadow of silence." Zen proverb. Story 19. The Cloud That Refused to Rain. In a valley between two ancient ridges, a lone cloud hovered for many weeks, gray, pregnant with rain, yet never releasing a single drop. Farmers below cursed it. Children pointed at it. Birds avoided flying through it. They named it Da-mai-keokiet, the miserly cloud. But deep within the temple, nestled in the mountain mist, Master Hakun observed it each morning during meditation and whispered gently to himself, "Still not ready to let go." One day, a young novice named Ichiro grew frustrated. His rice plants had wilted. The sky had promised rain for days, yet that same cloud lingered stubbornly. In anger, he climbed the winding steps to the temple and asked the master, "Why does that cloud refuse to rain?" Master Hakun didn't answer with words. He gestured to the bell hanging silently above the altar. Then he struck it once. A deep tone rang out and faded slowly into stillness. The master said, "Clouds are like people. They rain only when the weight becomes unbearable, or when they understand what they hold is not theirs to keep." Zen parable within. A monk once carried a bowl filled to the brim with water. He was instructed not to spill a single drop. At first, he walked carefully, tense, anxious, calculating each movement. His shoulders grew stiff. His breath shortened. Eventually, he stumbled, and the bowl splashed. The master, watching from a distance, said, "Why did you drop the water?" The monk replied, "I tried too hard not to lose it." The master smiled and said, "The bowl was never yours to protect. You only had to let it reach where it needed to go." The next time, the monk walked freely, and the bowl? It arrived full, because his heart was light. Philosophical reflection. Possession is a trick of the ego. We hold on to emotions, memories, relationships, and even pain, as if letting go would erase our identity. We become clouds, heavy with longing, guilt, pride, or fear, afraid that releasing what we carry might leave us empty. But Zen teaches us the purpose of holding is not to preserve, but to release with awareness. Rain is most nourishing when it falls without demand. Likewise, compassion, sorrow, or even wisdom becomes healing only when shared, not hoarded. The cloud that refuses to rain eventually vanishes, unremembered. But the one that surrenders to gravity brings life to the earth below. 4. Psychological commentary. Ichiro's anger toward the cloud was in truth a projection. He had been carrying a private grief, a letter from his brother who had left home years ago, promising to return but never did. Each season that passed, Ichiro worked harder, hoping his labor would earn back something he lost. He thought if he could just succeed, just grow the best rice, maybe his brother would come back. But the rain didn't fall. So Ichiro blamed the sky. Master Hakun saw this. That evening, under moonlight, the master handed Ichiro a folded paper crane. "Every sorrow you carry," he said, "is a kind of cloud. You believe it's your burden to protect. But some clouds are meant to drift away, others meant to rain. Which is yours?" Ichiro stood silently. The paper crane trembled in his hands. In the days that followed, he began to change. Instead of waiting for the rain, he fetched water from the nearby stream. He sang to his rice plants. He smiled at the cloud without expectation. And then, on a quiet afternoon, without thunder or warning, the cloud released a gentle shower. Ichiro did not run out to celebrate. He simply bowed. Letting go is not forgetting. It is returning the weight to the sky. 5. Meditative closing. Some clouds reign to nourish. Some clouds reign to grieve. Some clouds never rain, but slowly disappear. What kind of cloud are you? If you are carrying something, an emotion, a memory, a secret, ask yourself, is it yours to keep or yours to release? Zen does not ask you to be empty. It asks you to be free. The next time you see a heavy cloud, smile. It may be waiting for someone like you to forgive, to understand, to let go. And perhaps in doing so, you become the rain someone else has been praying for. Meditation prompt. Sit quietly and visualize a cloud above your heart. What is it made of? What is it holding? Imagine it slowly releasing, drop by drop, until only sky remains. Inhale gently, exhale completely. Let the rain fall where it must. Zen quote, "You are not the cloud, you are the sky. Let it pass." Story 20. The Lantern That Forgot Its Flame. In the far eastern village of Mizuno, nestled by a lotus-filled river and shrouded in thick mists each morning, there stood a temple known only as the House of Still Light. Unlike other temples, its great lantern tower had long ceased to shine. Villagers whispered that its sacred fire had gone out decades ago when the last abbot passed away in silence. Since then, the temple remained open, yet dim, its halls cold, its bells quiet. Only an old nun named Sister Kana tended the shrine. Every morning she swept the stone path, whispered to the lotus pond, and refilled the offering bowls, though few pilgrims came. One rainy evening, a man named Koji wandered into the temple. A traveling merchant with no fixed home, he had been lost in the forest for days, carrying little more than a weathered pack and a chest full of worries. He saw the broken lantern on the high spire and asked the nun, "Why do you keep a lantern that no longer burns?" She smiled gently. "Because forgetting its flame does not mean it never had one." That night he stayed at the temple, and over tea the old nun began to tell him a story, not about the lantern, but about the man who once lit it. 2. Zen Parable Within. Once, a young monk was entrusted with a single task, to light the lantern in the meditation hall each night before sunset. At first, he was diligent. He cleaned the glass, trimmed the wick, whispered a blessing as he struck the flint. But over time, he began to wonder, what was the purpose of the flame if no one truly noticed it? One evening, in a test of spirit, he left the lantern unlit. Nothing happened. Encouraged by silence, he skipped the next night, and then the next. The darkness became familiar. The routine faded. The flame was forgotten. When the master asked him why the hall felt colder each evening, the monk replied, "Because winter has come." The master only smiled. "No, because you have left your inner fire at the door. The lantern outside you will never burn if the one inside you has gone out." 3. Philosophical reflection. In Zen, the flame is not only literal, it is symbolic of awareness, presence, and responsibility. When we forget our light, we begin to walk in borrowed shadows. We let go of the small acts of care that defined our inner world, waking with intention, speaking with gentleness, noticing the breath as it rises and falls. The monk did not simply forget to light the lantern, he forgot why he did it. So often in life, we abandon rituals that nourish us because their results are not immediate. We grow impatient with the invisible fruits of presence. But Zen teaches that the effect is not always seen, only felt. A lit lantern may seem meaningless in solitude, but its warmth shapes the space, its glow softens the silence. The flame you tend in your daily life, through kindness, discipline, silence, is what makes the world feel inhabitable for yourself and others. And when you stop tending it, it's not punishment that follows, it is absence. 4. Psychological commentary. Koji, the traveler, was burdened not by hunger or cold, but by something deeper, a numbness in the soul. He had spent many years in the market cities, trading goods, chasing fortunes, avoiding sorrow. His mother had passed away a decade ago. He hadn't returned to his childhood home since. His sister had written letters. He never answered. A love once offered, he turned away with the excuse of not now. He had not committed great crimes. He had simply forgotten to light his lantern. In modern psychology, we might call this condition a slow emotional dissociation, a gradual detachment from one's values, empathy, or spiritual center. We distract ourselves with busyness, consumption, or avoidance. We tell ourselves that the fire within us is not needed, or that it will return on its own.
But it doesn't. Like a neglected hearth, it grows cold until one day we no longer recognize the house we live in. Koji's stay at the temple was not dramatic. Sister Kana never lectured. She simply invited him to join her every morning, to sweep the path, to fill water for the altar, to feed the koi fish at dawn. At first he resisted, but slowly his hands remembered tenderness. His steps slowed, his silence softened. On the 5th night, without asking, Koji climbed the broken ladder of the lantern tower. He cleaned the old casing, oiled the rusted joints, and when the sun fell behind the misty hills, he lit the flame again. No villagers saw it, no one clapped, but the temple changed. The next morning, the mist over the lotus pond was tinged with amber, and Sister Kana said, "Now Musono can dream again." 5. Meditative closing. We each carry a lantern within. It may be cracked, rusted, hidden beneath years of forgetting, but it is never beyond repair. Do not wait for applause to light it. Do not wait for the world to tell you it's needed. Just light it.
With one act of gentleness, with one breath of awareness, with one honest moment of silence, the flame returns. Zen does not ask you to be extraordinary. It only asks you to remember the small light you carry and not to leave it unlit. Meditation prompt. Close your eyes. Picture a lantern in the center of your chest. Is it lit? If not, what has extinguished it? Inhale slowly. Picture your breath as firelight. Exhale, releasing the dust. Repeat, I return to the flame within me. Let it burn quietly. Zen quote, "The lamp does not light the room, it lights the mind that notices." Story 21. The Sound of Empty Bowls. The story. In a sleepy riverside village of northern Laos, a boy named Sombat wandered between homes with an empty tin bowl. He wasn't a monk, but he had grown up near the temple and loved the ritual of almsgiving. His parents had vanished during a flood when he was just 5. The villagers, kind but busy with their own survival, left him to grow up half wild, half wise. Sombat's bowl was old and dented, yet he carried it as if it held treasures. Every morning he'd walk barefoot to the temple, mimicking the young novices. But unlike them, no rice awaited him. Villagers nodded, smiled, but gave nothing. He wasn't ordained, he wasn't deserving. Still, he bowed in front of every home, held the bowl with 2 hands, and whispered, "Sadhu." "Crazy child," old men mumbled. "Pretending to be holy," women whispered. Only the village idiot, a hunched man named Liam, ever gave him anything. A boiled yam, a slice of mango, once even a tiny bell. One day, a visiting Zen master from Japan arrived at the temple. He was quiet, sharp-eyed, and deeply still. Villagers gathered, hoping for blessings. Sombat stood in the back, holding his bowl. After the chanting, the master asked, "Who here seeks truth?" Everyone raised their hand. He pointed to Sombat. "You, what do you carry?"
Sombat looked at his bowl. "Nothing," he replied. The master nodded. "Then you are ready." 2. The Zen Parable. The master shared an ancient koan. A young student once visited an old Zen master. "Please teach me truth," said the student. The master poured tea into the student's cup until it overflowed. "Why are you spilling it?" asked the student. The master replied, "You are like this cup, too full of your own ideas. First, empty your cup." 3. Philosophical reflection. Sombat's bowl was physically empty, but it symbolized more: a soul without entitlement, a heart not yet hardened by disappointment. In Buddhist thought, emptiness, shunyata, is not void, but readiness. A full cup has no space, but an empty bowl can receive the universe. Many villagers lived with full bowls of pride, opinion, judgment. They believed they were already good enough, wise enough, deserving enough. So no room remained for learning, let alone transformation. Yet this boy, without merit or robe, had the one thing even monks sometimes forgot: the silent dignity of emptiness. 4. Psychological commentary. In psychological terms, Sombat's act reflects what is called beginner's mind, a state of openness, curiosity, and receptivity. Unlike adults who accumulate identities, "I am a teacher," "I am successful," "I am right," children like Sombat are fluid. His trauma, abandonment, and solitude didn't solidify into bitterness. Instead, they created space, emptiness not of despair, but potential. Modern therapy often invites clients to let go of rigid beliefs, grudges, traumas. But letting go is not about forgetting. It is about making room for new experience, new insight, new self-understanding. Sombat unconsciously practiced this. Every morning he invited rejection but carried no resentment. That bowl, it was his mirror. 5. Meditative ending. One evening, long after the Zen master had left, villagers began placing food into Sombat's bowl. Not because he demanded it, not because he became a monk, but because they saw in him what they'd long forgotten: humility without shame, emptiness without lack, seeking without words. He didn't smile or thank them in excess. He bowed, softly said "Sadhu," and walked on. That night, under a quiet moon, he sat by the river, eating slowly, not because the food was precious, but because the silence was full. Meditation prompt. In your life, what bowl is too full to receive anything new? Zen quote: "Only the empty can be filled. Only the silent can hear." Anonymous. Story 22. The Stonecutter and the Moon. The story. In the shadowed valley of Mount Doi-Chang-Dao, where limestone cliffs shone like ancient teeth, there lived a man named Pry. He was a stonecutter. Day in and day out, he would chisel granite from the mountain, shaping blocks for temples and bridges. His hands were hard, his back bent like a question, and his dreams buried deep under layers of dust. Pry lived simply: a shack, a kettle, a worn blanket. He had no wife, no children, no ambitions, only the rhythm of stone and silence. He never complained, but he often wondered, is this all life has for me? One afternoon, as he hammered beneath a blazing sun, a royal procession passed by. Elephants with gold-laced tusks, nobles in silk robes, and a king beneath a jewel-encrusted umbrella. Fry wiped his brow and whispered, "Ah, to be the king, that must be the greatest power on earth." That night, the moon rose full and low. A breeze rustled the bamboo. Then came a voice, not loud, but ancient, like riverbeds speaking. So be it. Fry woke not in his shack, but on a throne. He looked down, rings on his fingers. Courtiers bowed, servants rushed to fan him.
His word became law. But the sun scorched the land. No matter how he commanded, the heat would not relent. His soldiers sweated, the people fainted. Even he, the king, burned beneath the sky. Frustrated, he gazed up. "The sun, that is true power," he muttered. "So be it." And so Fry became the sun. He blazed across the sky, igniting deserts, splitting rocks, laughing as rivers dried. Until one day, a cloud blocked his path. "No," he roared, "I am the sun." But the cloud moved freely, veiling his light, dimming his wrath. The cloud, more powerful than the sun. So be it. Fry became the cloud. He danced through skies, wept over mountains, flooded fields with his tears. But then the wind scattered him. "Wind," he cried, "the greatest power of all." So be it. As wind, he howled through valleys, lifted roofs, bent trees to his will, until he met a mountain. The wind blew with fury, but the mountain didn't budge. And so Fry became the mountain. He stood tall, unmoving, silent. Seasons passed. Birds nested in his crevices. Rain painted him green. He had become the final, eternal force. But one day he felt a tickle. Tap, tap, tap. It was a stonecutter, a man in rags, chipping away at his side, slowly shaping blocks. Fry felt pain. "How?" he murmured. Then the voice returned. "The humblest tool can change the firmest thing. Perhaps it is not what you are, but how you are that holds power." So be it. And Fry awoke, in his old shack, as the stonecutter once more. He looked at his calloused hands. He smiled. That morning he sang while working. 2. The Zen Parable. A wandering monk once met a proud warrior. "I have conquered lands and kingdoms. What have you conquered?" asked the warrior. The monk replied, "I have conquered the one who longs to conquer." 3. Philosophical reflection. The story of Fry echoes one of the oldest dilemmas in human existence, the search for power, status, and identity. Like many, Fry assumed that happiness was tied to position, to being king, sun, cloud, wind, mountain. Each step seemed closer to greatness. Yet with each transformation, he encountered a greater force, until the circle completed itself. In Zen, this is the paradox of striving. The more one chases becoming, the farther one moves from being. True power, in the Buddhist view, is not dominance, but harmony with impermanence. A mountain may seem strong, but it is the tiny moss, the slow drip of rain, the patient hands of a stonecutter that shape it over time. Fry's return to his original self wasn't a defeat. It was a liberation. He no longer desired to be more than he was. He had touched the top of every imagined mountain and found emptiness. In that emptiness, he rediscovered joy. 4. Psychological insight. From a psychological lens, Fry's journey is a metaphor for ego inflation and eventual integration. As children, we often wish to become powerful, to be the hero, the ruler, the center of attention. As adults, this evolves into craving success, wealth, influence. These desires are not inherently wrong. They reflect human developmental stages. But if left unchecked, they lead to dissatisfaction, as each achievement reveals another hierarchy, another summit. The act of becoming someone else, king, sun, mountain, is often fueled by comparison, inadequacy, or avoidance of one's perceived limitations. Yet it's within those very limitations that our authentic self lives. When Fry accepts his identity as a stonecutter, he does not regress. He transcends. He finds meaning in the rhythm of his life, in the chisel song, in the simple miracle of shaping something from stone.
Psychologically, this is self-actualization, not the high of ambition, but the stillness of presence. V. Meditative closing. That evening, Fry sat by the river, watching moonlight ripple across the water. The mountain behind him stood still. The wind whispered. Clouds drifted. He smiled again, not because he had changed the world, but because he no longer needed it to change for him. He lifted his hammer. Tap, 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 and the world sang back. Meditation prompt. In your life, what forms of power are you chasing? What would it feel like to return to who you were before that chase began? Zen quote, "He who knows contentment is rich. He who conquers himself is mighty."
Story 23. The Bell of the Forgotten Temple. Narrative opening. The Hermit and the Outsider. The temple had long since crumbled into moss and memory. Hidden deep in a forest where no road dared wander, there once stood a modest Zen temple, now swallowed by time. Its bell tower had collapsed. Ivy had strangled the wooden beams, and wild deer slept where monks once meditated. Yet, amidst the ruins, one figure remained. He was called Senzan, Mountain Without End. No one knew his real name. He had lived in the forest longer than most villages had existed, growing as thin and knotted as the trees. Senzan spoke little and listened much. And though no student sought him out anymore, he still rose each day before dawn to sit in silence before the collapsed bell. He rang it with his breath. One autumn evening, as the air turned brittle and the leaves whispered of endings, a man arrived. Not a wanderer or a monk, but a businessman in a tailored coat and shoes that had never known mud. "I heard," the man said, "that this temple holds the wisdom to erase pain." Senzan tilted his head. "You heard wrong. But you are here. That's not wrong." The man scoffed. "I've tried therapy, medicine, meditation apps, coaches, psychedelics. I've built empires. I've lost my wife. And still, the ache, this endless ache in my chest won't leave." Senzan motioned to the ground beside him. "Sit." "I didn't come to chant or do yoga," the man snapped. Senzan didn't reply. He simply closed his eyes and returned to his breath, as if the conversation had never happened. The man stood in place for nearly 10 minutes, twitching and pacing. Then, with a resigned grunt, he sat. Silence took them. Only the soft rustle of wind across brittle leaves and the unseen sound of something breaking open inside the man's chest. 2. Zen Parable, The Bell Without a Ringer. Many years ago, a master monk lived in this same temple when it still stood. He was known for his deep compassion and thunderous bell, which he rang each evening at sunset to signal peace across the valley. It was said the sound calmed children and hushed quarrels between farmers. But one night, lightning struck the bell tower. The bell cracked down its center and fell, silent and wounded. But one night, lightning struck the bell tower. The bell cracked down its center and fell, silent and wounded. The villagers offered to rebuild it. They brought gold, labor, and blueprints. But the master refused. He simply said, "The bell has not stopped ringing. You have stopped listening." And from then on, he would gather everyone at dusk, close his eyes, and breathe. And somehow, they heard the sound again. Not with ears, but with hearts made still. Philosophical commentary. Listening to the unstruck bell. The businessman sat with Senzan for 7 days. He had expected teachings, mantras, secret insights. Instead, there was wind, there was hunger, there was cold, and there was the monk who never offered answers, only silence. On the 7th night, the man cried. He did not know why. There was no epiphany, just the slow leak of years of grief he had never truly allowed himself to feel.
Senzan handed him tea made from crushed pine needles and wild ginger. "You think silence is the absence of sound," Senzan said, "but in truth, silence is what sound returns to when it is finished." The man nodded, eyes still wet. "I built my life to escape pain. Now I sit in it. And somehow it burns less." Senzan chuckled. "You're not sitting in pain. You are sitting in truth. Truth has edges, but it also has light." 4. Psychological reflection, the noise of the self. Modern psychology tells us the mind has two primary strategies for handling suffering: suppression and distraction. We bury grief under work. We mask fear with noise. We chase healing through effort. But like the broken bell, our suffering is not healed by fixing or silencing. It is healed by listening. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Zen adds, "Until you listen to the bell inside your own chest, your life will remain a reaction, not a presence." Senzan did not teach in the conventional sense, but in letting the man face stillness, he allowed the buried echoes of his childhood, lost marriage, and burnout to surface. True transformation does not come from techniques. It comes from sitting with the self when the noise stops. When we ring the bell of our own awareness, not to escape, but to hear, something ancient stirs, something timeless, something free. 5. Meditative closing, becoming the bell. One morning, the man prepared to leave. His face had changed. Not softer, not wiser, but truer, less defended. He turned to Senzan. What was the teaching here? Senzan pointed to the broken bell, half covered in vines. "You are the bell," he said, "and every crack in you is a place where the silence shines through." The man bowed low, tears falling into soil. Then he walked back into the world, not to flee from pain, but to carry the sound of healing into it. And somewhere deep in the forest, a cracked bell rang with no sound, yet moved hearts across distances unseen. Meditation prompt. Sit in stillness for 5 minutes. Do not focus on thoughts. Do not resist them. Simply listen to the bell of your breath. Each exhale is the sound of your return. Closing quote. The sound of the bell does not come from striking it. It comes from the silence waiting to be heard. Zen proverb. Story 24. The Room Without Clocks. Narrative opening. The Still Room. There was a room in the heart of the monastery that no one dared to enter. It was small, stone-walled, windowless, and contained no clock, no calendar, no mirror, and no door handle from inside. Only the abbot held the key. The room was known among the monks as the Still Room. Legend said that those who entered the Still Room either came out enlightened or not at all. Some returned with peaceful smiles. Others wept and begged never to be sent again. A few never returned. To most of the monastery, the Still Room was a place of silent dread. But to Brother Ren, a 26-year-old novice with fierce intellect but untamed pride, it was a challenge. "You fear it because you fear yourselves," Ren locked during meals. "But if one truly meditates every day, what is there to fear in a stone room?" The abbot, a quiet man whose beard was white as snow and whose silence often struck louder than words, turned to Ren one morning and said simply, "You speak as if you know stillness, Brother Ren. Would you be willing to enter?" Ren bowed. "Gladly, Master." The abbot nodded, and without a word, handed Ren a small cloth bag. "Rice balls, for hunger. You may leave when you understand time." Confused but proud, Ren stepped into the still room. The door locked behind him. 2. Zen Parable. The Bell Without a Sound. In the early centuries, a Zen master sat before a large bronze bell. His students gathered eagerly to hear him speak. But instead of ringing the bell, he struck it gently with a wooden stick, again and again. There was no sound. Days passed. He struck the bell. No sound. His students grew impatient. "Master, why won't you let us hear its sound?" The master replied, "Until you hear it without ears, you are not ready to hear it with them." The next morning, the bell sang without a strike. Each student heard it in a dream. They awakened in tears. 3. Philosophical commentary. The tyranny of time. Time is both fiction and tyrant. It is the god that governs our moods, dictates our identities, and distorts our memory. Most of us are not afraid of death. We are afraid of the passing toward it. We fear not aging itself, but the awareness of aging. The sound of clocks, the changing calendar, the reminder of the hour, these drive our suffering more than fate itself. Zen does not deny time, it simply refuses to be enslaved by it. To step outside of time is not to freeze the world, but to enter the only true now. The past exists only in thought, and the future is born from fear. The present moment, when undistorted, has no clock. It breathes. But to reach that stillness, one must go through chaos.
4. Psychological reflection. What happened in the room? Ren sat on the floor, proud and upright. "I'll meditate. Easy." The first hour passed, peaceful. By what he guessed to be the second hour, he began to grow anxious. He tried to focus on breath, on silence, on the throb of his own heartbeat. He ate a rice ball. But as what felt like days passed, something began to shift. He had no sense of morning or night, no sound from outside, no change in temperature, just the walls and himself. The mind, starved of reference points, began to invent. His childhood replayed in fragments, his father yelling, his first failure, the girl who left him. Then the shame of envy toward other monks, his anger, his ambition. Then came fear. "What if they forgot me?" he muttered. "What if I die here?" He banged on the walls, screamed, cried, slept, dreamed, forgot who he was. Until it all dissolved. There came a moment where thought stopped. No past, no memory, no goal. Only breathing, rock, stillness. A silence so total it embraced him like a womb. He had not been meditating. He had become meditation. Time, as he knew it, never returned. When the door finally opened, how many days later, no one could say, he stepped out barefoot, smiling, with tears in his eyes. The first thing he said to the abbot was, "There was never a door." V. Meditative closing. The present is the master. Contemplation prompt. Close your eyes. Imagine a room without clocks, mirrors, or noise. No goals, no labels. Just you breathing. Can you remain? Zen saying. To know eternity, become the moment. Zen Master Taquan. Reflection question. What would your life be like if there were no concept of late, old, or not enough time? Who are you without the clock? Breath practice, 3 minutes. Breathe in slowly while counting from 1 to 7. Hold for 4 counts. Exhale without counting, just feel. Repeat. Then sit, let time fade. When ready, gently open your eyes and return, not to time, but to presence. Story 25. The Mirror in the Rain. Narrative opening. The Painter of Clouds. In a mountain town where clouds gathered like secrets, there lived an old woman named Sayuri who painted only one subject, the sky. Morning, dusk, storm, snowfall, she painted skies endlessly on scrolls of rice paper.
People came from far away to see her work, hoping to find landscapes, portraits, or drama. But all they found were skies, gray skies, gold skies, skies after rain. When asked why she never painted people or stories, she smiled and said, "They're all in the clouds." She lived alone, without a phone, without electricity, in a wooden house that tilted slightly toward a slope. Her days were filled with brushstrokes and the quiet fluttering of silk robes. But Sayuri had a secret. Once, in her youth, she had been a famed courtesan in Kyoto. Men offered gold for her attention, poets wrote verses for her voice, and a general once promised her a castle. But her heart belonged to one man, a monk who never touched her hand. They met at night under plum trees, speaking of dreams and death, until the day he vanished. He left behind only a riddle. Find the mirror that does not reflect. Paint it. Sayuri abandoned everything, wealth, jewels, her name, and became a painter of clouds, chasing the meaning of a mirror that shows nothing. She searched in puddles, in glass, in the eyes of strangers, but no mirror gave her peace. Then, one spring, a boy arrived. He carried a wooden flute and sadness in his shoulders. His name was Sora. He asked if he could help her paint. She handed him a blank scroll. Then you must learn to see. 2. Zen Parable, The Monk and the Mirror. A young monk once asked his master, "How do I know who I truly am?" The master gave him a mirror and said, "Look into this every day for 7 years." The monk obeyed. Every morning he sat before the mirror, examining his face, his eyes, his moods. On the 7th year, he threw the mirror into the river. The master smiled. "Now you're beginning to see." 3. Philosophical commentary, Mirrors that lie. We often think the mirror is truth, but mirrors show form, not essence, surface, not soul. What we see in the mirror is not who we are, but a collection of memories and self-judgments layered on skin. We avoid the mirror when we age, approach it when we are proud, destroy it when ashamed, but rarely do we use it wisely. A true mirror, if it existed, would show not what you look like, but what you carry, your grief, your longing, your false names, your untold forgiveness. Zen suggests there is such a mirror. It cannot be bought or hung. It reigns. 4. Psychological reflection, What the boy found. Sora stayed with Sayuri for weeks. He painted skies, but his strokes were too eager. His clouds were too hard, his skies too blue. "You don't paint the sky," Sayuri said gently. "You paint how you want the sky to be." He avoided her eyes. "Is that wrong?" "Only if you want to see." One day, while gathering water at the stream, Sora broke down and confessed. His father had taken his own life during a scandal. People called his family shameful. His mother locked herself in silence. Sora played the flute in alleys for coins. No one saw him. He hated mirrors. Sayuri didn't speak. She led him back to the cottage. That night, it rained. Not a storm, just a gentle spring rain. The world turned silver. Sayuri walked barefoot outside and pointed to the garden stone basin, now full of rainwater. "Look," she said. Sora saw a reflection of himself, but blurred, rippled, imperfect. "I don't see myself," he said. "You see more," Sayuri whispered. "The rain is the mirror. It does not flatter, nor judge, nor stay, but it reflects your presence, not your form." In that moment, Sora began to cry, not for shame, but because he felt seen for the first time by something that didn't need him to be anyone. He returned the next morning and painted a sky unlike any before, faint, incomplete, breathing. It wasn't beautiful, but it was true. Sayuri smiled. "Now you can go." Sora asked, "Where?"
to live.
She handed him a sealed scroll. When you find someone who has forgotten who they are, give them this. He left with no address to return to. The house remained. The skies continued. V. Meditative closing. The mirror that sees you. Contemplation prompt. Close your eyes. Imagine standing before a mirror that does not reflect your face, but your presence. What does it show? Is it quiet, tense, angry, soft? Can you remain with it without needing to be more? Zen quote. Water reflects the sky only when it is still. Zen question. What would change in your life if you stopped using mirrors to judge how you look and began using silence to feel how you are?
Silent practice, 4 minutes. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Picture a bowl of rainwater in front of you. Imagine your presence, not your face, reflected in it. Breathe slowly. Each breath disturbs the surface, then calms it. When still, notice what emotion arises. No need to fix, just observe. Then gently return to the world, carrying the mirror that cannot be seen, only felt.
You've journeyed with us through still waters, ancient echoes, and quiet awakenings. If even one story touched a part of you, if even one silence felt like home, then perhaps the empty boat has done its part. We invite you now to pause and reflect. What stayed with you? What softened inside? If these stories brought value to your day, please consider sharing them with someone you love. Leave us a thought, a whisper in the form of a comment. We read each one, slowly, gratefully. And if your heart feels called, subscribe to The Empty Boat, so that together we can continue this gentle unfolding, one story, one breath, one moment at a time. Thank you for being here. May peace walk with you wherever you go.